I am ranking every single great Russian novel so we can kick off a literary renaissance. And Russian literature changed my life, and I know it's changed the lives of hundreds of millions of readers across the world. So this is a definitive guide to every single Russian classic, because the dozens of novels we are going to talk about today have the potential to rock your emotional, intellectual, or spiritual life. And so I want to tell you guys the best ones to read. The ones that will change your life. And if you don't know, my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time. And you guys already know that that has to include the Russians. And so I'll be ranking each novel 1 out of 100 today and basing that ranking on 3 different criteria. The first one being just general literary merit. The style, the ambition, the characterization, the plot, just all of that. Second, the transformative effect of each novel. Can this novel emotionally, spiritually, or intellectually open you up? And I will try to think of that problem and process from an average reader's point of view rather than the god tier lit bro that's read every single thing in the world and would love to tell you that your experience doesn't matter. And third, and this is a very small criteria, is the influence of the novel on literary culture or Russian culture, because a few of the novels we are talking about today are from the early 19th century and may not be palatable to modern audiences, but nonetheless were very, very influential on literature at large and deserve to be on this list. And so, boom, there it is, everyone. If you guys support my mission of waking up a billion new readers and creating a literary renaissance, then a subscription, a like, and a comment telling me your favorite Russian novel before we get going would be much appreciated. And of course, even though I am talking about dozens of novels today, I can't talk about books I have not read yet. So I do understand that there are going to be some books that you love that I missed. And so let me know down below and I will do a part 2 when I have a chance to read them all in a year or two. And so first up, everybody, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, the chairman of the board when it comes to Russian literature. Of course, Leo Tolstoy. But first I want to build the mythology around Tolstoy a little bit, because you already know that Tolstoy was the author of Anna Karenina and War and Peace that we are going to talk about in a second, that are going to be very, very high on this list of transformative and great Russian classics. But Tolstoy had an existential crisis after writing those 2 novels that he details in his nonfiction book, A Confession, which is wonderful. And Tolstoy realized that he was just writing for the lit bros, that he was writing for the hardcore readers, and he wasn't writing for the working class of Russia. That he had disconnected himself spiritually from what actually mattered in the world, and that Russian culture had turned into an aggressive mechanism to deconstruct and destroy everything in its path, and the intelligentsia were somewhat to blame for that. And when you look at the situation that we are in today, with endless irony, with endless deconstruction and takedowns of authors even like Tolstoy, what many people don't realize, and we can look back at history to see this, is that it doesn't purify us. It separates us. It does nothing positive for us. Ezra Pound, the famous American poet who later became a fascist, at the end of his life finished his epic book of poetry, the Cantos. And after a long reflection of his life and his mistakes, like joining the fascist party and a bunch of other things in his personal life, the last line of his 1,000-page book of poetry read, "Not destroyers, but men." And he wasn't just talking about the military, but the thinkers, the artists, the culture, the people. In our nihilistic and disconnected world today, we no longer believe in a spiritual rebirth. A resurrection is not possible, you guys, if you don't even believe a spiritual world exists, if you don't believe you can try to attain or connect to some form of the transcendent. And we've been so flattened by technology, by war, by information, even in the age of Tolstoy, that we have closed ourselves off to this idea. And I get it. We have been scammed by so many charlatans all throughout history. But when you look at the world, it's pretty easy to diagnose that many of our problems are spiritual or emotional problems. And that if we close the door on this idea of resurrection, which is the title of the Tolstoy book that we are talking about right now, then actually solving problems in the world close, because countless times we have dumped endless money into education and social programs. And what that money is saying is that we believe that people can change, that this stuff is important, that obviously that we believe in humanity and taking care of people, but that we believe that being a good citizen just doesn't mean that you aren't just violent, and barely literate, but that you are spiritually attuned to higher principles and a part of a community and believe in something. And I was an English teacher for 8 years, you guys, in Nevada and Arizona, which are some of the worst states for education in the country. And I would see this. I would have students that I would have their freshman year, and they would be pieces of crap, you guys, throwing stuff at me, not reading, sleeping through class, doing drugs, just like not very good students, right? And if you had a closed mind, which many teachers do, they would say these kids have no redeemable qualities. They're going to be the janitors, the ditch diggers of the world, and they're not even going to make it through high school. But a lot of the time they were right. But having watched multiple classes of kids move all, from freshman year to their senior years, what I realized was that they were kids who did have this reawakening. Some of them occasionally hit me up and say, yo, Mr. Kanak, I live in Florida now and I have a family and I'm going to college and community college. I'm getting my life back together, yada, yada, yada. Thank you so much. And it's also true in the world of adults. I know I've had friends or known people that were addicts or abusers or terrible people. And many of them are still addicts and terrible people. But I have known others who have had an awakening, who have changed. And that's why I want to open with this novel. That's why I want to talk about this. I know that talking about War and Peace first would be good for retention and the clicks, but one message from this novel, and today I'm not going to be doing any real spoilers, like the big stuff. Obviously, we'll be talking about characters and themes and stuff like that, but I'm not going to spoil anything major. And so this novel is about a aristocratic man that gets a woman pregnant and just basically abandons her. And years later, he sees her in a trial on a prostitution charge because after he abandoned her, she basically went down this really dark road and eventually gets caught for being a prostitute. And when he's seeing how the system, the world, everyone, including himself, basically abandoned her, he tries to go on this mission to atone himself and not just disconnect and help her, but like disconnect completely from the system. And this is a very anarchist idea. Tolstoy in this time period of his life had turned into an anarchist. So Tolstoy had written these 800-page novels, Anna Karenina and War and Peace, and then had this spiritual moment. And after that, he decided, I'm only going to write for the peasants. Like, I'm not going to do anything hard. And that's when we get, novels like The Death of Ivan Ilyich and a lot of Tolstoy's nonfiction writing, which is really good. But a little bit later, Tolstoy almost balances the two worlds in this novel. This novel comes in at over 500 pages, and it's not a hard read, but it's not an easy read, something that you can just give to anyone, like The Death of Ivan Ilyich. So Tolstoy in this novel is exploring his almost evolution of ethics, because there is this classic Old Testament idea of ethics and objective morality. But Tolstoy had, I think, tapped into the idea that, many of us now believe today, that the classic systems of punishment and the eye for the eye mentality can create a lot of blind spots. And for those who are privileged or the aristocratic in society, even much like today, their sins don't reflect on them, but reflect on the people. Because this one man's sin of, getting this girl pregnant and abandoning her moved throughout the entire system, which is such a potent metaphor in a novel, you guys, that we think that we can do something and it does nothing. This is what happens when you become detached. This is what happens when you become flattened. This is a core mentality that modern individuals have adopted. But Tolstoy showed through this one the interconnectedness of all things without making it too woo, without making it too spiritual, because sometimes people do this, and I like when this happens, through more of like a Hermann Hesse interconnectivity type of lens, which is really fun to do, but Tolstoy remains grounded in what he's good at, the bureaucracy and the civility of Russian society and how it keeps us away from our emotions. And the structure of our society right now is still based in the old world. People will comment, why are you moving your hands so much? What is this, Communication 101 class? Do you guys know where that idea comes from? The reformed British society. You must be unemotional and unmannered and logically think of everything. I'm not even doing a British accent right now, but sorry, I don't even want to do it. But this colonization mindset, as in other parts of the world, moving your hands was no big deal, and it doesn't necessarily matter. And the reason I love to talk about transformative literature is that when I was young, you guys, I was a piece of crap. I was the logic boy atheist in high school, and up until I was like 19, I was just getting with chicks and then breaking up with them. And it wasn't until I suffered 2 traumatic brain injuries in like 3 months from longboarding and then a skiing accident, just like doing dumb stuff, that I had to start to feel, because I could no longer think. I was having these insane headaches. And I had to rely on the spiritual world and my inner world to get by and to actually keep myself occupied. And it was crazy, but I resurrected. I became someone that the people who knew me in high school no longer recognized. And since then, and I'm sure you're the same way, if you're watching literature videos, you've gone through many transformations, and some of the people you know are still in the same model as what you knew them in 10 years ago. And this is why, I love to talk about literature and going out in nature and spirituality and helping your community or starting a family, because it helps break you away from the flat impersonal body of our institutions and now technology. It helps break you away from the flat families, that Tolstoy talks about, And so emotionally, I love this novel because it shows you the actual process of waking yourself up to morality, to ethics, to some of these greater ideas. And what it requires you to do is drop the inner drama within yourself. And it usually takes a long time. It doesn't do what a lot of literature does, which is like just redeem the person and do it fast and use it as just a quick moment of characterization, or just damn this guy forever. Like, oh, you committed this sin, then you're going to live eternally or even happily ever after. Tolstoy balances that well, and that's what it's actually like in reality. If you have these resurrections and you start seeing the world in a new way and you start trying to help others or like connect to these deeper things, it happens through seeing the world, in a certain way. And Tolstoy does that perfectly. Spiritually, this novel is also very impactful because Tolstoy is pushing back against this idea of damnation in Christianity, that, we need to just focus on the people who are guilty. And instead, we need to look at the guilt inside our own heart and our complicity in it. And that it should be a positive thing, that we have become this weird society. Like, you need to admit your guilt and we need to retribution and like all this stuff. And there's so many problems. And in actuality, I feel like, and this is what Tolstoy argues, is that because we are in a society that lacks any compassion, that there's no compassion in the home, that there's no compassion at our jobs, there's no compassion in our institutions. Like over here in America, in most places around the world, we don't have healthcare, we don't have childcare, we don't have paid leave for like maternity care. Like, it's insane. Like, when I was a teacher, I got nothing. Like when I had my kid, like, yep, how much vacation time do you have? 2 weeks. Okay, everything after that's unpaid. Which is insane that it's not even just a week. Like, here is a week. Because I have friends in other countries that get months off. But nonetheless, it's not about that, but about compassion and seeing the world through compassion. And that's what Tolstoy really argues, and kind of the main message of his later life, which I 100% agree with, and I think is one of the greater spiritual ideas out there. The novel also really cares about something that Tolstoy grappled with a lot, which is, what are you willing to give up? Like, if you have an idea and you actually believe in it, then you're somewhat obligated to that idea and you have to see it through thoroughly. And one of the crazy parts about our society now is that we've basically been pushed away from that idea that, with these major corporations like Amazon and others, we aren't forced to rely on them, but many of us, just choose to rely on them, or choose to rely on companies or creators or whoever that are using AI maliciously, or, to just, squeak out profits and get rid of jobs. But we don't want to sacrifice our own comfort. And Tolstoy, who, grew up and, even as an adult had serfs and actually got one of his serfs pregnant, if I remember correctly, was in this position, and his wife and kids were horrified. Like, we should just give all this up. And they're like, what? Fuck that. But he was already seeing that, like, wait, if we're thinking about this through like a New Testament point of view, not that you don't need to be poor and be a beggar, but he started to see some of the problems with, how we treat property and money and power in our society. And, he was 100% on point, as we're about to talk about in a second, with what was about to happen in Russian culture. So is this novel as good as War and Peace or Anna Karenina? No. I've maybe hyped it up, pretty well here. So I'm going to give this one a 92. And you know what's so funny about Tolstoy, you guys? That out of any author out there, I get more heat when I talk about Tolstoy, and I can gauge this through the angry emails I get and the people who I've met in my online writing and literature community who are in love with Tolstoy. They are the biggest group of idealists and wild cards that I have ever met, and plenty of them have been awesome. But there's another group that are more hardcore and will say, like, just you being on YouTube means that you're a sellout, right, conscious, and like other stuff, like just crazy, and like we all need to detach and only hand out our works in person and not sell books online, like completely detached from the internet as they're writing on the internet, like insane stuff. But what's funny is that if you've ever read Into the Wild by John Krakauer that details Christopher McCandless's life and death, he was this huge fan of Tolstoy that used Tolstoy's work to basically drive him so far out into the woods of Alaska that he ended up starving to death. So anytime I talk about Tolstoy, I know there's someone out there like raging out like, you're messing this up, right, conscious? They're starting to type out their email. Years ago, before I had any subscribers, I talked about the Iliad, and that was the longest message I ever got. It was pre-ChatGPT too, definitely written by this person. And I put it into a word counter. It was like 7,000 words, just saying how my interpretation of Homer was wrong. Like straight insults too. Like it was so funny. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I run the most active book club in the world. In 2026, we are reading 28 transformative novels together. And I host the book club over on Substack, which is the home of the literary renaissance, where the best writers and readers in the world are located. And over on Substack, I have literature courses, I have writing courses, I post my own writing, I do free live streams. I do so much over on Substack. And so if you guys want to support me for free, or you guys want to become a member and get access to huge full book breakdowns that go for sometimes an hour or multiple hours, doing what I just did with Resurrection, but at length, you got to go check out my Substack. I think I have 3 book breakdowns on Tolstoy works already over there, plus some Dostoevsky's. And this year, we are going to be reading in the book club 2 of the Russian classics, I should say, that we are reading today. And so if you want to support me and the literary renaissance, each membership keeps me afloat, makes me able to do this full time and put out the volume that I do with the passion that I do. And so thank you guys, and buy t-shirts if you guys are interested in repping and making the streets lit. I'm going to be dropping some Tolstoy and some Dostoevsky shirts soon, so go check those out when they're available if you're seeing this in the future. And let's hop back to the video. So now we got the big one, everyone. Now that we got, the initial one out of the way that I wanted to sell you guys on, War and Peace, one of my favorite novels of all time. I'm actually planning to reread this very soon, which is like a toxic habit that I have. And I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm running a literary magazine right now. I'm trying to release a book this year. I have like all these big things that are going on. And I'm reading all these books with my book club and all this other stuff I need that I'm studying for like my own writing, like styles I'm trying to get into my unconscious. But I have this toxic habit of starting these really long novels when I shouldn't be reading them, because I am a person who gets obsessed with reading and books, and like will just be reading them all the time. I carry books around the house. Anytime I have a moment to read 3 pages, I do. Like when I cook, I have like a thing that holds the book so I can be reading. Like I'm literally obsessed with reading, you guys. That's why I have this channel. That's why I do all this. And so when I start something, it's bad because then I need to finish it. And so if I start Blood Meridian, I could finish this in a couple hours, but it's going to take me dozens of hours to finish War and Peace. And sometimes I'll just stop myself from reading. Like I'll take 2 days off from reading, or just like focus on reading like poetry or essays or short stories or stuff like that's just kind of like one-off, so it doesn't really matter. But something I've had to stop myself from doing is, and I can't really do this, is reading these big books. Like the other day or a couple weeks ago, I was like, I'm going to just read Genesis. I'm not a Christian, but I have the Oxford study edition that's like 2,500 pages of the Bible with all the footnotes and maps, New Revised Standard Version. I was like, I'm just going to read Genesis in this version. I've only read the King James Version. Suddenly, I'm almost through the Old Testament, you guys. I've spent dozens of hours reading, watching lectures online. I read Marilyn Robinson's book, reading Genesis. Like I'm like going and like I'm not planning any content on this. I'm just like down this rabbit hole. And what's bad is that I've had the itch to reread War and Peace for like 6 months, if not longer. And I'm like, it's literally in a box in storage right now. And so anyway, War and Peace is one of the greatest Russian novels of all time. And I'll just spoiler alert, I think that this is going to rank higher than any other novel I'm going to talk about today. This is the one. So let's start with transformative elements first. If we're going to talk about it spiritually, if you look at, for instance, no spoilers, Pierre, he's the perfect embodiment of what so many men out there are going through right now, which is this ungrounded, chaotic mentality. You know, our testosterone's going way too crazy. We're listening too much to David Goggins a little too much. Where are all my dogs out there? Rah, 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 rah. Who's going to carry the books? Who's going to carry War and Peace all the way? And I don't know who the David Goggins of like 1850 was, or if you even needed him, because you just could go stab people and like go run around and do like almost anything. But maybe you were inspired by Napoleon, the short man. But until this day, many men, and I think it's probably just our nature, live chaotic lives, and obviously women too. And they are constantly looking for something to worship. We see this in person, and of course we see this online. Like there are some people who worship me, even though my message is we need to read and go transform others. And it's really hard for it just not to happen. And today, when we have so many people who are so good at so much, whether that's artists, musicians, writers, athletes, whoever, it's like really hard not to do that. But the classic way, and we've moved to more of a personal system of worship, was the worship of systems, the worship of cultures, cults, whatever we want to call them. And when I first read this back in the day, when I was like, 18 or 19 years old, is the whirlpool effect of being idealistic and a spiritual seeker. So Pierre in this novel, this is a major spoiler, gets sucked into Freemasonry. He gets sucked into these socialite circles and in other groups, and it's up and down, up and down. And it takes a lot of fortitude and also a lot of experience. Like, I don't think that this is wrong. Like, people will, make fun of young men or something for idolizing someone, but a lot of the time it lifts you up. Like, there were a lot of people who I idolized back in the day, and now I've just grown to, enjoy what they gave me. I don't really keep up with them anymore, but what they did for me was really important, and I wouldn't be here today. And if I didn't do that, and all my friends that didn't do that, and like get deep into a mindset or framing of reality or even a person to help kind of model to lift themselves up, they aren't, as I would say, far down the road in like intellectual, emotional, and spiritual growth. And I'm not even like, patting myself on my back, because I did a lot of this online. The fastest way to do this is like in person, like what Pierre does classically, like joining groups and going around the world and like doing stuff in person. And I did a lot less of that than doing more like finding authors or people, online who like I thought resonated with me. And guys, there is a million things in our world now to believe in. And so what we need to solve this problem isn't belief, because yes, there is the CoffeeZilla, everyone's a grifter, everyone's a snake oil salesman culture, but there have always, and that's downstream of our logic bro mentality. That's downstream of the rationalization of everything. Everyone being in nude sleep. And also just because like that stuff exists too, that there's just like straight up people that are terrible. They're crypto scamming and doing that type of stuff. And so belief is the foundation. But what we are really needing, and what every man and woman out there is seeking through transformation, through life, hopefully, is orientation. Because if you can align or orient yourself with your purpose, your mission, I like to say divine mission or divine purpose, or like this higher purpose in your life, if you don't believe in any of that, which can be discoverable. And there are methodologies and modalities to discover that. And hey guys, I'm a literary influencer. It's not my job to do that, but there is stuff out there. But if you can align with something in a very spiritual sense, not like, I just want to hustle and make money for my family, or be the best writer or the best person ever in the world, but actually be aligned with something, then you will be able to spiritually ground yourself. Then a lot of these ripples will start to end. And the problem is, and this happens in Pierre's case, this happens in these worlds with these grand figures. This is one of the messages of War and Peace, is that we are being obfuscated, you guys. I believe that it's intentional, but I could just see how it's systematic. And the word obfuscate is different than confused, because being confused just means like, I don't know what's happening. But being obfuscated means that you are being deliberately confused. Because mind control just doesn't happen out of nowhere. People love to jump to this idea of divide and conquer, of polarization. But there's 2 steps before that. First, you have to be obfuscated. You need to not know where you're coming from, or like, your past, your present, or the future. Nothing can be grounded. And when there is so much information out there, and everything has been flattened and deconstructed and destroyed, it can be really hard to know what's real or what matters. And so if you're confused, that's one thing. But the second step of mind control is having your worldview poisoned, and to start to believe that there's nothing that we can do, because that's what many people believe right now, that we can do nothing to push back against these politicians or change our country or educate people, that everyone is just a bunch of random NPCs. And then when we start to believe that, then you get divided and conquered, and then you're screwed. So the way to prevent obfuscation is through orientation. If someone's trying to scramble you, then if you have a system or belief or a mission, then it's really easy to reorient. And that's the spiritual, deeper message. One of them, there's like a million. It's a long novel. There's like a lot of different plot lines going on here, but that's one that I really resonated with in this novel that really changed my life, is this process of going from scrambled to grounded. And I love that it's set in war and in peace. Like, our reality is chaotic too. Like, these characters, you know, they're living in a novel, right? Like, my day-to-day isn't like chaos. Like, there are these moments where it's like these big like explosions, but for many of us, we don't need this type of stuff. But for many of us, we are living in a chaotic world, and there are these grand narratives with these huge figures that are changing the course of history, whether you like them or not. And all I can say is that there is a much higher chance of succeeding in becoming grounded and living a happy life if you try to and if you believe in it than if you don't. And the people in this novel that, and in most of Tolstoy's novel, and just I think in life that try, usually can do it. And so let's talk about emotionality here. Something that I think Tolstoy has, which is a great advantage over Dostoevsky, is I think he's more spiritually and emotionally attuned to his characters. For instance, you know, and I get it, you guys. I know that Anna Karenina, got over here out of the shot, is titled Anna Karenina, but we get a lot more of Levin and other people than actually Anna Karenina. But nonetheless, with Tolstoy's female characters and family squabbles and all of that, there is depth. Within the novels, there is grandiosity, there is shame, there is sadness, and it's not manufactured. We'll talk about this with Dostoevsky, but it feels sometimes like he's forcing the issue. And somewhat weird, like, why are they being histrionic? Like, what's happening here? But with Tolstoy, he speaks in such a way that it feels 100% relatable to people today. Like, it's so weird. He's one of the only people in 19th century literature, in my opinion, that almost has he has a very, very high degree of correspondence to how I believe people think and act today. And I think it's because Tolstoy had a great deal of thought in his own soul and thought about it a lot. And, you know, had a lot of these revolutions and transformations within his own soul, even before he had his Christian rebirth. And he can create, and he manages this so well, and equates war and peace. So on one side of the aisle, we have Napoleonic battles, philosophical digressions, historical digressions. But then on the other side, we have these family squabbles. I keep saying squabbles. I'm feeling like Kendrick Lamar. Squabble up. Where are you from? Russia. My wife hates that song, but that one can get me pumped up. Sorry. But Tolstoy gives moral, intellectual, and emotional weight to both sides of the aisle. As in an anti-war novel, it's all about the hero and the man, and in most great literature, but we get the perfect balance in here. And I think it's something that David Foster Wallace, who was a huge fan of Leo Tolstoy, you know, there's a good book out there called On Moral Fiction by John Gardner, and he advocates for writing moral fiction, which is just basically my idea of transformative fiction. If you're going to write something, and you have this creative art, why would you write something that's entertainment, like slop? We have enough ways to disconnect. And Gardner talks about how you can literally write things transformative, and that the great authors of the world are so good that they can lose a little bit of the creativity and stuff that comes out of the unconscious by just literally talking about a message specifically. David Foster Wallace was so good that he just went into Infinite Jest and just knew what the themes he was going to talk about and just made it happen. Tolstoy does the same thing. A lot of great authors do that exactly. People will say, "Oh, you don't stop preaching." When amateur or intermediate beginning writers, which I'm still in that category. If you're not on shelves and writing like this, then you're still probably an intermediate writer. You know, when you try to push a message, it doesn't work. But if you've put in tens of thousands of hours, then you can basically make anything work. And so with War and Peace, it's like Infinite Jest. David Foster Wallace said of Infinite Jest that he would do really easy sections that were fun so that you would be forced to get through the really hard sections where he would actually teach you something. So with Infinite Jest, you have the lit bro parts and the emotional parts. And War and Peace is the same exact model. You have these parts that attune to me. I listen to history podcasts and history audiobooks, and I've read, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and Will Durant's Story of Civilization series. I don't talk about it very often, but I sit sometimes and I'm thinking about 14th century England, what the fuck? And then I think why am I thinking about this? It matters, right? And understanding history matters to make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes, which is somewhat funny because I don't think any of the people actually in power actually have studied history. Regime change in the Middle East. It's going to work this time. But both sides of the aisle read the same, and both sides of the aisle, whether it's the emotional family stuff or the hardcore military or philosophical stuff, read the same to me. Like and I think that's what he does better than, I would say, like an Infinite Jest, is that you seamlessly move through both. And I think that's a very high mark in terms of being a transformative writer. It's what Dostoevsky does in The Brothers Karamazov with Orthodox Christianity. He just basically forces into thinking about these major ideas in Christian thought. And that's how reality works. Like the internal and the external are all connected. Like our internal reality as a collective is what we see out in the world. The homeless crisis, violence, our successes as a society, the amount of freedom we have are all a reflection of our collective inner soul. And right now, if we raised our ability to physically control ourselves, our intellect, our emotionality, and our spirituality by 20%, there would be major changes in the world. It would literally change it like overnight and in a week. And in like a year, it would look vastly different. But what's insane is that we've literally been going down the scale. Like, I think that because we've been numbed, I think people are maybe a little bit less violent now, obviously, because we're living in like the control system. But I think that's like, there's a lot of sleeper cells out there that like just don't have a chance because we're so isolated to be violent anymore. But then when they get in a relationship or are in a weird situation, they like freak out and can become violent. But we're kind of sliding down the scale. But I want you guys to think about something really fast, which is like so cool. So let's say I look at myself at 17, like in terms of my intellect, my emotionality, and my spirituality. I have not just increased a couple percentage points. I have surpassed that version of myself by thousands of percent by now. And I'm sure the same is true for you. And so when we think about that, we are sliding down the scale. What's insane is that as we get closer to zero, it turns into anarchy and mania, and basically all of us just fucking dying. But the cap is endless. The cap, going back to this idea of rebirth and resurrection, is 5,000%. What if we just didn't increase the baseline by 5%, but 5,000% collectively across the world? What would the world look like, you guys? I want you to think of the 4 categories I talk about: physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual. Think of the one you've had the greatest like transformation in. Imagine if every single person in the world had that similar level of transformation. What would it look like? It was hard for you, but was it impossible? No. How have we created a society where that's not possible? Don't get me going down that rabbit hole. Oh my God. And connecting this back to the novel and an idea of history, this novel, if you go read the Spark Notes on War and Peace, it will say it dismantles the great man theory. And because it shows that people like Napoleon and all these other people don't actually know what's going on. These generals, a lot of these higher ups, that fate moves in general in through the collective percentage that we're all at, that there are these figures and these grand motions. But what's sad about modern history is that if you go and read, like I forget the name of the biography, but I listened to it. It was a biography on Napoleon. And we get the details of his journal and of his life. And those journals and letters are Napoleon writing when he knows that he is going to be archived and he's performing. But we get no deeper exploration or theories on him psychologically, which I know that if a historian does that, they're basically now not a historian. But it's sad that we've reached that point. Someone like Will Durant in The Story of Civilization wasn't afraid to just psychoanalyze people, even though psychoanalysis wasn't that big of a thing yet. And so what Tolstoy brings to the table is being able to bring interiority to some of these events, to some of these characters, to some of these things that generally we just hear about. That's the way to escape the great man theory, is not to just be an armchair psychologist, but to be able to blend it all together and have practiced on other things to understand human nature very well. And so in terms of literariness, in terms of transformation, in terms of influence, I mean, this is maxed out. And so I am going to give War and Peace a 99, everyone. So next up we have The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. And this is one of Tolstoy's shorter novels. It's only like 100 pages. This has been read by countless people. This is the type of novel that you can just give someone and say, hey, read this, and they could get a good interpretation of it. I've literally known people all across the board who have loved this novel. Like I have I had at university a very Christian and conservative friend back when I went to university in Utah, and he loved this book and he would talk about it all the time, and he actually got me to read it back in the day. But then I've talked to like some of my nihilistic friends, and like they'll talk about it. Like this novel can basically reach out to everyone, which is really awesome. And being able to do that, I think, in your repertoire as an author is smart, because there's scaling, right? That like someone like a David Foster Wallace has, like, he has like essays and like This Is Water, and then you could scale up to infinite Infinite Jest or The Pale King, and the same with Tolstoy. As like with Don DeLillo, I think, or like some other authors, they're just novels that are like generally kind of hard or like whatever. And so with this novel, you're maybe not going to create the type of revolution in the soul, but the contemplation of death is really important. The sociologist, I think, Ernest Becker, has a great book titled The Denial of Death that builds on Freud's protege Otto Rank's book, Art and the Artist, that details our basic denial of death, that art is about the immortalization of our soul and, so that we can live on. And like it builds into this theory about how in general in our society, we are denying death. And obviously you can take this into plastic surgery and the Kardashians or many other rabbit holes. But confronting death is really important, you guys. Like you don't want to deny it because it just ruins your ability to actually live in the moment. Death, when contemplated, shows you that this life is a constraint and should be able to spiritually open you up. And so the framing of this novel is very interesting. It's through this idea of at the start, we basically get the framing that Ivan Ilyich is dead. Like they're looking at his body. And then we go back in time and basically see the lead up to his death from his point of view. But what we see is his neglect of his family, his terrible family life, his focus on work, his focus on status and power, and his pure detachment, right? And then we eventually see this spiritual awakening. Sorry, I'm not really spoiling. Like, I guess it's a spoiler. It's 100 pages long. We get to see his spiritual awakening in the face of death and how he deals with death. It's a really strong concept, and it's been stolen, or I should say imitated, used in countless movies. And so one of the good parts about this novel is that we get Tolstoy's honesty. Like when you read Anna Karenina, War and Peace, Resurrection, the characters he has that honesty. There are moments where I'm like, wow, I feel that way, and I'm not comfortable saying that. I guess just Tolstoy being kind of like an aristocratic dick, like, to his wife and like having these he's like, I'm resurrected, like whatever it was, like he kind of has the ability just to say the shit that we can't afford to say, I guess. And like, that like I just wouldn't say because like, I like to have good relations with my people and, anyway. So spiritually, this can be very big, but I think emotionally and intellectually, it's somewhat lax. I think in influence, it's really high, but I think in terms of just the overall structure, I'm going to throw it like at an 88, which, if you guys are hearing these ratings and you like are pissed or something, most novels that are being published today, like that, or even literary fiction, are like a 40 in my opinion. And so if I wrote a novel that I would rate a 70, that I would read and didn't know it was me and give it a 70, I would be like so satisfied with my career as a writer if I could like even reach that level, even a 60 on my scale. So like getting an 88 is like so good, great job. So next up we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And I honestly feel like it really just depends on who you are, but I feel like this could be one of the greatest Russian novels of all time too. The lit bro in me, you guys, like the lit bro in my heart, it has to put War and Peace at the top at 99. And maybe something will get 100. You'll have to see. But I'm going to throw this one down a little bit at a 97. But what I find interesting about Anna Karenina is that War and Peace is one of the more unfinished novels of all time, alongside Infinite Jest and Gravity's Rainbow, like these big, because it makes you work, it makes you push. It is vague, it is weird, in that regard. But Anna Karenina, you guys, I know a lot of people who have read this, like randos. Like I know like people that don't read or like are mostly book talk light readers who've read this or listened to the audiobook and loved it. Like a very wide degree of people. And maybe it's because of the movie. Like, I don't know. I don't even know how commercially successful that one was. It obviously wasn't very good. You can't really, I think would obviously require like a pretty long TV show to really get into it all and be able to explain it because it's just so big. But there's this class of readers that sometimes I think the lit bros or and I'm using lit bros, but just like the lovers of the classics, like the hardcore readers, I think that mentality isn't for most people. That there is this group of people out there that read 24 novels a year. Let's say 10 of them are like modern and like 10 of them are classics and just a couple are some wild cards. And what do they want to get from a book? They don't necessarily need to be like one-upping things all the time. They're not doing rankings in their head. Like they're not thinking like, or reading the book and being like, this is a response to Russian nihilism and whatever it is, right? They're not going through what maybe some of us deeper in the game are experiencing. what they are getting into it for is the experience. They are trying to transform or feel something and just let that kind of unconsciously happen. And as I talked about earlier with when we were talking about resurrection, we've become sensitive to our inner world, to these narratives within our own soul. And our entire reality with social media and all this stuff is our internal world. We just are constantly bombarded by these perceptions of others. And this is why I feel like, some of the depression and stuff is so high, because everyone is under so much scrutiny. The standard has become so high. There's so much need to appear or do whatever or be something. And I saw this so much with my students. And so in terms of style, I think that this is stylistically the greatest Russian novel maybe ever written. I mean, the style, the scope, the framing is out of the park. Some of the greatest novels of all time, like Anna Karenina, can have subplots that are so good that they could be the main plot of a book that you would rate 95. And what I've realized is that every great novel has a great subplot within it. If you look at like The Godfather, like there's beautiful subplots in that, or like whatever movie. And the best ones, at some point, the main plot can only get so good. There can only be so much going on there, and it's not easy to max. It's somewhat easy to max it out, right? Like we could just throw everything at the wall, but the unconscious layering, the unconscious subplot, these mechanisms that are working on the back end, especially if they're social, especially if they're not just like pure layering or like crazy stuff that you'd find in a Blood Meridian, which is fine. That's a whole other thing. But if you can do that in a way that can get a common reader to also get down with it, that's when you can knock something out of the park. And that's what Anna Karenina does very well, in my opinion. And so, I mean, this is a Mir novel with Anna and Vronsky and Levin. Like there's so much going on that level that we could sit and talk about. And I guess we'll just start down the line. So stylistically, this novel is amazing. Spiritually, there's not as much there. I think one of the big ideas is that what happens when you deviate from the world and what that feels like. Like, for instance, like I'm sure a lot of you guys are black sheeps, right? Like renegades, look at us, we're so cool, oh my God. But like many of us have like, hopefully, I mean, unless your family is a bunch of geniuses, I'm hoping you've broken away from some of the scripts, right? Broken away from some of the societal stuff. And getting out was awkward. I'm sure you guys went through something similar. Like it's not easy to break free and it takes years. Like I had, I know someone who's listening to this right now who sent me a message. And he was telling me about, a family member who he's very, very close to. And she's like, they're having to separate finally. And he's got these big ideas. He's got these big ambitions. Like he's like very smart and he's like putting great stuff out into the world and she can't understand it. And it's horrifying, you guys. It's really hard to go through. And so this novel does this in a way that's very clean. Like in Dostoevsky, you'll get some of this, but it's like I said earlier, like histrionics. And Tolstoy creates these dynamic moments that you just have to sit through like humiliation and shame and growth and watch people make these horrible mistakes and watch it all play out with full detail. Since like, because like when you look at like normal dramas, like for instance, like my wife loves, I don't know if she loves it. I mean, she'd probably like come punch me in the face for saying this, but she enjoys the drama of the show Bridgerton. And I think I watched like the first 2 seasons with her. Our agreement usually is that if I make her watch like bro shows, like if I'm like, you gotta watch Old Boy, you gotta watch, we're rewatching The Wire, hon. You gotta understand the subplot of Stringer Bell. Then she's like, okay, I want a break. Like, Jesus Christ, Ian. Like, this is all just bleak insanity. Like, can we watch something dumb? And I'm like, okay, I'll watch. And I'm a lover of story. I'm a lover of narrative. I'm a lover of entertaining fiction. I can get down with something. But with a lot of the more, and I know Bridgerton is a show, and we're comparing a dumb modern show to a classic novel. But even novels like that, they lack any general interiority and depth and don't make you sit through a lot of the mistakes, and they don't really have a lot of the tragic elements because modern audiences don't necessarily want to handle that. Anna Karenina has some, as can goes as tragic as you want, it can go as spiritual as you want. It, if you read it correctly, can be also very nihilistic, very fatalistic. It's a lot happening, and you get all the drama. It's like fucking clown show. And so it just really depends how you want to transform, how you want to see the world, right? Like what you need or what really calls out to you. And usually it's probably your weakness. Do I need more War and Peace? Like, or do I need more of an Anna Karenina? Probably I need more of Anna Karenina and the thoughts and revelations from that, because, maybe that's something I'm repressing a little bit more. And so I'm going to throw this at a 97 though. Fuck that. We're going 99 for War and Peace, everyone. All that aside, that sounds great, but 97. So there it is. We are now done with Tolstoy. Goodbye, Tolstoy. I love you. Thank you. I could have talked about some others, but like, how long have we gone? Like, guys, like we got how many more authors do I have to cover? Jesus Christ. So next up we have Dostoevsky, and I love Dostoevsky. And this past year in the Right Conscious Book Club, we read at least 10 Dostoevsky novels. We were going to get through all of them, but then we were getting into some of the more esoteric ones, and not as many people were wanting to read them. So I said whatever. But we also were reading and got through the greatest biography on an author of all time, Dostoevsky by Joseph Frank, a writer in his time. And the abridged version, you guys, is 1,000 pages. Look, I've like destroyed this thing while reading. I was like reading it in the bath, bringing it everywhere. The unabridged version is 5,000 pages. So I've read every Dostoevsky novel and like short story collection. I've basically gone through it all, but we're not going to talk about every single one today because they're all not classics, I would say. Some of them are kind of duds or like just more, we got to get filler pieces that I would say that lead to these bigger revelations about Dostoevsky. Like, oh, this helped him get, train up for this or whatever. And so first up, we have Notes from the Underground. I have to shout out my 8th grade teacher, you guys. I would not be here, at least most likely, if it wasn't for my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Stewart. He started this thing called Boys Book Club, which is not allowed today. Like in the schools I was teaching in, like making gender exclusive clubs, like he would have just thrown any chick out that tried to come. Like, no way. Like, it's Boys Book Club. And we would sit after school once a week and he would give us books and he would say, I need you to finish this by next week or 2 weeks from now. And then we would come and talk to each other and present and talk about these things and like do presentations on like, not like, oh, we're going to talk about metaphor today, but like actual elements. Like I remember giving a presentation like on the Black Hand stuff that caused the group that like was responsible for starting World War I, like whatever that was, like stuff like that. And we were like deep in the world. And the first book he gave me was Siddhartha, which blew my mind because funny enough, it was like the perfect storm. That previous year when I was in 7th grade, I'm a really big skier. Like my dad's a big skier. Like my dad is in his retirement. He skis like 100+ days a year. And like every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, we were skiing no matter what. And I hurt my shoulder. Like I do like park skiing and I like hit a rail and just tumbled really hard. And I think I like got a micro tear and I just thought it just kept hurting though. And like the doctor said, oh, it's fine. But it was like just super screwed up. And so one of my mom's friends or someone said, you should do yoga. And I was like, I'm not going to a fucking yoga class. Like, that's dumb. Like, only chicks do yoga. And so then I found some dude online, Chaz from Yoga Amazing, and like would follow his online videos a couple times a week for like a shoulder video. And it really helped. And then I like kind of was like, what is all this? And so then when I finally read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I became obsessed. I was like, dude, this is sick. So then he gave me The Stranger. And then I was like, oh my God. Because then I was reading about Buddhism, and like Buddhism, if you like, depending on what type you research or are thinking about, it could be like very detached, right? Like it can lead to being kind of logic bro. And then I read The Stranger and I was like, oh, nothing matters. And then I read Notes from the Underground. And back then I was kind of like, yeah, this underground man's a little like crazy and I don't want to be like him, but he's kind of right, dude. Like, and I'm not mad about it. And the real heroes that this video is dedicated to are all the girls I dated when I was like in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade who like put up with me talking about all this. Like they would just sit and be nice and I would just be ranting like all this stuff. And they had no care in the world. They just wanted romance. And that's when I started writing poetry. I was like, I gotta be a poet. So funny because it is such a hack. Like if you can get good at it, like it's insane. So I have some problems with this novel. This novel's still going to be in the 80s, but this is the obvious description of the devouring lit bro, the sad boy who's sad and wants to tell us but doesn't want to do anything about it. And Dostoevsky was the perfect person for this, and he nails the mentality perfectly. But the transformative stuff is a little bit muddled in my head. The stylistic stuff is a little bit muddled in my head because, yeah, the message is don't be like this. And it's gotten a lot of people in the game, but it's also been kind of a calling card for people to somewhat adopt this mentality, which is kind of weird in literature, right? Like it's this general argument of, or an art, like if you're not being primed and you just pick something up and you're already heading down a road, even though it's kind of a mockery of a mentality, even though Notes from the Underground is basically just Dostoevsky arguing against like a bunch of logic bros, doing their intellectual debates in the world of Russia. And, nonetheless, I've literally known people that have adopted this mentality. Like there's a guy who comes to the Right Conscious Book Club called The Underground Man. Shout out my boy Jeff, who's breaking free of this mentality. but he feels like he's the embodiment of it. I have such a funny story about Jeff in our book club. A woman was talking about how in like James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, how like she read this moment. She's like, do men really feel this way? Do men really feel this way about women? And like, do they have this expansiveness within them? Then he hops on. He said, when the Ravens were kicking that field goal against the Steelers and it started to go off, I had that feeling within my heart. Oh my God, I was laughing so hard because like, you know, that's when men really feel the deepest. Like when your fucking team misses the shot and you're like, oh my God. That's when we really feel. So this is actually a really good example of philosophical fiction though. So like I said, I won't get into it here. This is a response to some philosophical intellectual battles happening in Russia. And Dostoevsky basically presenting it through this character, the underground man that is generally unlikable, presenting these ideas. And you can tell that Dostoevsky has felt many of these things himself. It's a really great framing to position itself. Like stylistically, being able to basically just make the reader care enough. I remember first reading this, I was like, who is this guy? And I was sucked into the rants because I wanted the moments of him being like scrutinizing himself or like being weird. Those moments kept me through all the philosophical stuff, which started to make me think. And because I had never been exposed to almost anything like that, I thought like, damn, this beats all the random like half-baked religious arguments that I've heard and like all this other stuff. And I was like, what? And all that was really important, you know, for me and to develop that kind of dark shadow mentality that eventually contrasted. Because individuation happens with balancing both sides of the aisle. For instance, I was a yoga teacher. You know, I did my yoga with Chaz, and then I later on became a yoga teacher. But what's interesting about all the people I met in yoga is that they were all blown out, bro. That they were all just focused on the positive. And I would think, like, do you guys know about the entire scope of reality? Do you know about the descendant? Do you know about nihilism? Have you felt it? Or are you just doing this to avoid something? Like, you know, the people that only stay in nihilism, they're trying to avoid something. And, you know, just like anything, you have to understand the entire the worlds, the transcendent, craziest new age Christ conscious stuff, or the most nihilistic philosophies of depravity. And what was so funny that actually drove this home in my mind, because I was seeing it, is that, and I knew about this a little bit, is that I grew up in Las Vegas and I did all this stuff in Las Vegas. And so I was doing yoga in Las Vegas, but at the same time, I was also doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And Jiu-Jitsu, Vegas is like the fight capital of the world. Like some of the best Jiu-Jitsu gyms in the world are all there. You have 1 million people to train with that are world champions or world champion level. Like it was really awesome. But what was crazy is that outside of a couple people in the world of jiu-jitsu that were really pieces of crap, everyone was a really good person, even though they were like, we were beating each other up and fighting each other. And I even remember, you guys, there was this guy named Anthony, and he was more of an MMA guy. And so in jiu-jitsu, I would like beat him up, right? Like if it was a fight, he would beat my ass. But I would, do little funny tricks that would never work in a fight to beat him. And he would get so mad during rolling. He would like elbow me or like do things like and act like it was an accident. And like I remember like having this huge cut on my lip and like getting so mad. I'm like, dude, I know you're doing this on purpose. Like I know I'm the goofy 6'3" dude that's doing these funny barambolos on you, but don't rage out, bro. It's all good. But what was really cool is that outside of the gym, we actually became friends. And over time, like he was actually a really reliable person and someone that I would trust. And like he holds it down. Like he's like a dude that he just had like an anger problem. Like when he got into fighting, he would be like fighting. He didn't. But the world of martial arts, which is balancing the art and the martiality of it, like, the martial spirit, is that like really nice balance of these two worlds. And I really like, that's why I'm such a big supporter of martial arts. But in the world of yoga, I met schemers and backstabbers, and like I was just as deep, but the amount of people that were on drugs and getting plastic surgery and involved in MLM and it was wild. And I was like, what is happening here? Like I remember like there was this woman that was trying to date me, and like we went out on a date, and I learned that she was like fucking her non-blood uncle that had like divorced her aunt. And then I was like, what? And then she was like doing like crazy MLM stuff and like scamming people. And I was like, and she was a yoga teacher and like super, like the crystals on. I was like, what is happening? And like that just kept happening. And so what's interesting about Russian literature and why I think that it's so good is that when you look at Russian culture, there are these hallmark moments, right? There are these beautiful culture, beautiful language, beautiful history and the struggle of the Russian people, even before the Russian Revolution. There's all this stuff, but it's been hard, you guys. Like living out there in the sticks, out there in the north is not an easy life. And once you add in the Russian Revolution stuff and the oppression of the Ukrainian and Eastern European people, the Russian people are tapped into some deeper levels of darkness. And what I like about Dostoevsky, though, is that he can channel that. Some of the authors we're going to be talking about today are very much more nihilistic and tap into that energy, especially post-Russian Revolution, which is fine and like understandable. But in this novel, after you go through the initial underground man disquisition, you get this like prostitution angle. Like, what is up with, like, how many novels are we going to talk about with prostitutes today in Russian literature? I get it. There's a lot. For whatever reason, but I feel like that's half-baked too. I don't feel like that's the underground man was basically Dostoevsky, in my opinion, preparing for demons and preparing for Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. It was like him discovering this idea and getting it down completely on paper, like him taking what he did in House of the Dead, this, the darkness within him, getting that out, and then letting that catalyze for a while with the death of his first wife and all this stuff, and I think his brother, if I remember correctly, and eventually leading to something bigger. So next up we have The Gambler by Dostoevsky. And so I should say that Notes from the Underground 81. So I am going to let's talk about The Gambler. So The Gambler is, a lot of people read this novel because I think it's almost had a resurgence in modern culture. Like I know friends that are like in the literary, like read the 20 books a year and like, about Dostoevsky, have read Crime and Punishment, and they like always gravitate toward this book because I think it's a problem now, obviously. Sports betting, poly market, like it's everywhere. Like it's like a really big problem. Like I grew up in Las Vegas, but I've literally never gambled in my life or sports betted in my life outside of one time when I was in Costa Rica. When I was in Costa Rica, we went when I was in high school with all of my family, and my dad gave me $20. Like he's like, oh yeah, go. I was like, can I get something from the convenience store? But I had met a guy that was selling weed, and I also saw there was like this weird betting thing that was going on that like the locals were doing. And so my cousin and I were in a lot of trouble, you guys. Like we got in, we knew exactly how to get into some random shit really fast. Like could have gone really bad. And so we were trying to buy weed, and they were like, no, we're only going to sell, we're not going to give you $20. We can only sell you an eighth for $40. And I was like, oh my God. And like, I asked my dad for I was like, hey, and I didn't bring any money on the trip. Like I did have money, I just didn't think to bring it. And my cousins too. And like, we couldn't think of anything. So we're just going to go bet this $20. So we bet and we win. Boom. Got the weed, got baked in Costa Rica on the beach. Let's go. And I understand the sentiment behind being an addict, right? Like I've been addicted to things, just like smaller stuff. But nonetheless, many of us have addictive personalities, and many people are addicted to sports betting. And so I think that's why there has been a resurgence with this idea. And Dostoevsky, of course, does a really good job at describing the idea of being a gambler because he was a gambler. He gambled all his money away and was a piece of crap throughout his life in that regard. And so he's the perfect person to step up to this. But I just don't feel... okay, so on a spiritual level, I think it's partially there. I think that there is the idea of the spiritual rebirth in this and individuation, and I think that ranks pretty high. But I think emotionally and intellectually, this wasn't that stimulating for me. I think in terms of the plot and just the general narrative, I think it was kind of gimmicky and not my favorite. So I'm going to rate this down at an 80, everyone. Good book, like I said, if you're interested. It's not a bad read. It's pretty fun, but not my exact favorite. And so next up we have Demons by Dostoevsky. And for all my fans out there of Albert Camus, there's a great screenplay that he did of play that he did of demons, also called The Possessed or Devils, depending on what translation you are getting. And this is like on the bucket list of like plays and literary things I want to go see one day. I'm sure they usually only do it like in New York City, Europe, or some esoteric place. And so I would say personally that this is close to my favorite, if not my favorite Dostoevsky novel. It would be up there between this or the Brothers Karamazov. But you aren't here for my exact opinion. You're here for the general objective ranking. But I would say this is where Dostoevsky's style shines the most. I feel like this is where he is dialing in on all cylinders in terms of the literary stuff. And if you believe Nabokov, he would say that Dostoevsky has no literary qualities, or like the Russian bros out there that are like, oh, it's just the Western people that like Dostoevsky. It's only people, no one in Japan actually likes Murakami. He's like the Colleen Hoover of Japan. So stylistically, this is ranking in the 90s for me. I think that Dostoevsky, because of the length, just even partially like brings a lot to the table. There's, long eras, love stories, tragedy, suicide, stuff that I can't even talk about that happens in this novel. I mean, I could talk about it, but I'd rather not. That drive this and like really bring out a lot of the elements that you wouldn't normally get. But spiritually, what this novel talks about is what happens when people become destabilized. What happens when God and society and these institutions and the norms that we know get removed from your life? Do you become this heightened, elevated individual? Some people do, but in general, as a collective, as we saw in Russia and as we've seen in our culture, it doesn't do that. Most people fall into depravity. Most people fall into malignant mindsets because those structures are there for a reason. And I don't want this to necessarily turn into some like, we got to repair the social fabric argument, but it's, you can leave some stuff behind. You can leave some of these ideas behind, but first of all, it should be done in patience and over time. And if you leave all of them at once, that's when you get some of that insane instability that many of us had, and many of us felt, as young men. And so what also happens spiritually to people in this world is that they become, instead of worshiping God or instead of worshiping something that matters or something tangible, they fall into the world of abstractions. They start talking about revenge and revolution and trying to be pure. They start trying to talk about progress and utopia and all of this stuff. And this is the type of stuff that led to the Russian Revolution. Everybody working in this world of abstractions, which Tolstoy recognized, which in the name of progress, which is okay. But the problem is that you disconnect from the actual working class reality. You disconnect from the people, because the people, especially back then, who could have these thoughts and, feel them and put them out in the papers or in journals or speak about them in public discourse, weren't the people going to work every day in the factories, but the aristocratic class. And so eventually that detachment, that resentment just continued to grow on, at the bottom level, because no one was paying attention to them. And even worse, he shows how these new structures, these new ideas basically just become a mechanism for new people to be able to do malignant things. Whether that's, there's a chapter that wasn't published in the original that features child exploitation in this novel. That's very heavy. I feel like this novel is a little bit too expansive in terms of its characters and some of the ideas. It's pretty negative. I mean, just like not just in actions, but when we are getting these philosophical disquisitions, it errs more on the side of negativity. So, which is fine. Like I can roll with that. But I'm going to throw this one at around a 93. Even though I really like it, I feel like there's a lot that you have to understand and move through, and you have to do negative theology. You have to work through negation, which I just don't like. I'm weird. Like I feel like I'm just like a channel. Like, I don't know if it's because I grew up being criticized in my own house a lot, and then by my extended family, then just by the kids who I was going to school with. Like, when I went to school, middle school and high school in like the mid 2000s, I was around a bunch of bros that were wearing tap out shirts and like Just Bleed shirts and Affliction. And they were watching Chuck Liddell and like bullying kids and like being assholes and like, drinking, starting the Monster Energy drinks, driving trucks. Like that's just, went to a school on the outskirts of Las Vegas. And so I had to figure out a way how to channel like things and like lessons through negativity and criticism to, find this better path, because if I didn't, I would just be like, dude, this is like, reading actually forced me. Like I was trying to find meaning in the world, and when there was no meaning in my reality because everyone was just super toxic in like all the worst ways, then, I feel like I guess I have an affinity for that, other people don't share. But is why I think some of these authors wrote about this stuff. Was Dostoevsky is this a cautionary tale, or is he just trying to rant about nihilistic stuff? And it's like, no, it's more cautionary, but you have to find it. It's not just, it's more than just the blanket statement. It's more than just what happens in the story. Like, yeah, don't be like that. It's like, no, what are the things that build all toward that? And so next up we have The Idiot by Dostoevsky. And where I want to start with this one, this is once again a very long novel with, in my opinion, a lot of unnecessary fluff in there. But still, you should read it. Still, it's really good. But the main question that's asked in this one, kind of the main theme, is this idea of what if you are a pure individual that walks into a world that is crappy? Like, guys, if you're pure-hearted, if you have a beautiful soul and you're trying to help the world and do all this stuff, and how are you going to fare in the modern world, especially this world? You're literally going to be seen as an idiot. You're going to be seen as an idealist. Like, you're going to be seen as many different things because we've lost our ability to understand sainthood. We've lost our ability to understand and measure people through outside of just success monetarily, or having the hot wife, or the car, or whatever contribution, or the social media following. We've lost that ability to see some of these people and feel it. Like, I know people, I don't know as many anymore because I'm not as social, but like, back when I was younger, I'd meet these guys and they weren't on social media and they had deep wisdom. They were like in their 30s and like they were working random jobs, but they were like really smart, and they weren't like reading a ton. Like, they knew about stuff. They had read like a Dostoevsky novel or two. Like, they knew about stuff, but they just had this general goodness and alignment to them that was like, oh my God, like this is insane. But they got nothing because of that. And they walked around like saints in the world, and it was really interesting. And the main thing that Dostoevsky does in this novel is that basically through some of this goodness and through some of these other elements, he shows how everyone is basically functioning as a mirror. That in our society, when things have become so complicated, when we no longer speak to each other and we no longer feel, and things have become so obfuscated and polarized, and we've become so poisoned that we actually just can't see people for who they are and actually relate to them. People will say, I know what you are. You're just a piece of shit. Or like whatever it is. Like, people like have these very reductive viewpoints, or like, yeah, he's a liberal, like screw him. Or he's a conservative, like you're a fascist, like whatever it is. Like, we reduce people. And a lot of the time we destroy people, whether that's through cancel culture or takedown pieces, because we're performing. We're trying to do that to elevate ourselves and our status, and just for the sheer excitement of doing it. Like, I've done it before. I've done takedowns on people before, and it is exciting. It is performative. It does make you feel somewhat better, like, oh, look at me. And so this novel really features that. Like, that's one of the main emotional and I think intellectual messages. Does it show it that well? No, it just almost happens through the characters, and it's kind of like one of these deeper themes. I don't think that it's perfectly captured. But guys, how do we handle these saints? How do we handle people like this? When you see someone who's better than you, and people on Reddit, like, we've created a culture where better is not a thing. It's happened in the public education system. It's not. We don't want equality. We want equity. We want everyone to be the same. When I was in the Clark County School District, their graduation rates were in the 60s back when I was in high school. And then when I became a teacher, what they did to overnight raise the graduation percent from 60 to 80, or like 85%, was they stopped suspending kids, which ruined the ability to teach. They implemented something called, I don't remember its exact name, but instead of getting a 0 if you didn't turn something in, you'd get a 50%. So the lowest score you could give a student was a 50%. They removed all standardized tests, or they lowered the amount of credits. The curriculum became easier, and they standardized that. And boom, now we have 80, the graduation rate has gone crazy. But now all the kids, or most of the kids that graduate in Las Vegas schools, can't read, can't write, can't do math, don't even have good social skills. And people have an insecurity. We've created a culture where, I know this as a reader, I think you know this too, when you tell people that you read, oh, I should do that more, like, people are insecure. If you've like ever been in shape, like, people feel weird about that. And like, when someone's read more than me, that's awesome. Good for you. When someone's in better shape than me, that's awesome. When someone is like whatever, that's awesome. More rich than me? Awesome. Like, I'm not rich. Jesus Christ, you guys. Your boy's dipping into savings every month trying to make this dream a reality. But, so instead of dealing with that, we haven't even evolved past that yet, that most people exist in resentment and tear people down. And that's just with the simple stuff. When we get into the spiritual stuff, we really can't handle it because, as I talked about before, we don't believe in it. So anyone that's talking about spiritual things has to be a guru. They have to be a snake oil salesman. They have to be this. They have to be that, because they're telling you to be better. But I'm already good enough. Like, I'm already good enough. It's a scam you're doing, right? Conscious. You tell people that, they're not good enough, and you create a fear in them so that eventually you can provide the solution and then take all of their money and they can join your cult. It's like, that's where anything leads to when you tell people that, like, hey, we need to do better. Like, what, am I not already good enough? Dude, shut the fuck up. Like, I'm not good enough. It's so weird talking to people in real life, because that's what I have to do. I'm like I have to like do all these like qualifiers before I ever mention anything, so that like they don't initially like freak out, because when someone freaks out, you can't bring them back, and they just shut down because it's like their mom talking to them. It's like, oh my God, who are we dealing with? And so I'm going to throw The Idiot down at like an 84. I think it struggles in a lot of ways. It's too long, and some of these ideas, like I said, don't necessarily pay off. Like, you get it, but like I'm like I need to do like guide videos on these books on like how to get the most out of them, because I think most people are just like, okay, and then they move on. So next up we have Crime and Punishment, and if you guys are going to be reading Dostoevsky, I would recommend the Michael Katz translations. He's done a couple, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, and Devils, and he is the best by far. If you are going to, he doesn't have every single one translated, but he's better than Garnett, he's better than P&V, he's better than all of them. It is so readable, the humor comes across more. I've read all the translations. I've read 3 other translations of this, two others for The Brothers Karamazov, like many others for some of the other books. And so it's worth the money if you're going to do a reread, in my humble opinion, especially if you want a new book. Like, a lot of my Dostoevsky novels were like falling apart because I got them when I was like 17 or whenever. And so, boom, just a quick note. And so here's a hot take that isn't that hot. I would say that Crime and Punishment is a spiritual novel. The thriller crime elements are just a small part of it. And this novel asks the question through the protagonist Raskolnikov, can someone that's higher, so something that happens, you guys, is that as we start to get educated, we start to detach, we start to dehumanize, right? Like, I've raised my baseline, I'm better than everyone else, especially if you are going down this nihilistic road that we've already been kind of discussing. And so eventually, sometimes you may be asked or be called to test things out, right? And Raskolnikov, because he's better, steps out of the ordinary moral reality of what we all exist in and does something. Like I said, I'm not going to spoil anything, but what are you doing? You haven't read Crime and Punishment yet? Let's get it going, everyone. Once you're done with this video, because you guys love me and you're here to support me, then go order Crime and Punishment, Michael Katz version, if you haven't read it already. Raskolnikov commits this evil and then sees if he can remain internally the same, because he did it for a higher purpose that wasn't connected to God. So one of the first lessons that strikes me about this novel in a transformative manner is not that sin is like an action that we take. Like, yes, if you kill someone, that's a sin. But one of the first sins, and what leads to a lot of sins, is this idea of self-deification. Raskolnikov divides the world in a very Nietzschean way. And people do this, right? Like, there's the ordinary people, and the ordinary people have to follow the laws and do everything. But me, I am different. There's another class of people that gets to transgress that. And in society, that happens, right? There's this group of people, like, you know, I used to date a girl, and she was poor. Like, she had a really rough life. I didn't know this until later. Her stepdad choked out her mom and killed her when she was young and when she was in the house. And that dude obviously went to jail for life. But when she was 18 years old, she was going 65 through a green light, and some guy on the other side of the road turned into her. He had a green light too, and not an advanced green, but he turned and she hit him going 65, 20 over. And he ended up dying, and he was old. She was perfectly sober, nothing in her system, but she couldn't afford a lawyer. And so she went in with the county defender, and she got like 20 months in prison. Funny enough, I'm going to be releasing a book this year with written in an interesting new style and genre that I'm trying to put out into the world that features this girl and the time I lost her when we were on acid in the middle of the desert together. She disappeared. But funny enough, I also knew someone during this time, and I didn't know about this until later, who I worked with, and she killed someone in a car accident while impaired on marijuana. And because her family was rich, she served less than a year. Sad story about her. She ended up killing herself later on in life, you know, a couple of years after that. So bad times. If we were at a party right now, I could tell you guys more stories about this stuff, you know, about these chicks, but you know, we'll save that for bro time. Substack members only. So it's not exactly wrong, and especially in Russian society where you get away with even more of this stuff, or it's in a patriarchal society where men can just like abuse women, that you would have this idea that, you know, these higher beings, these dudes, can basically go do whatever they want and transgress all these laws. And this idea is somewhat biblical, right? This is the Genesis level temptation. Now, I am above all of this. But what's funny is that Raskolnikov doesn't do it through God. He's not in a garden. He's in the middle of a goddamn city. And Raskolnikov arrives at this new moral philosophy through rationality, through atheism, through philosophy, viewing people in this very twisted social formatting, which is what a lot of people still currently do, which is why the Russian philosophy is so important. They figured all this stuff out. They've been speaking out against this for over a century. And what's interesting is that there was this old idea that of being God, right? When we look at like the Pope and in pagan society or with kings and queens, they were like, even the Japanese emperor, they were trying to be like God, right? Well, today we kind of know that that's not true, or like that's kind of silly, and like none of us are really striving for that anymore. But what we strive for, what do we want to strive for? What do the elites, what do the terrible people strive for? They want to not be God. They want to be above judgment. They want to be able to do whatever heinous or whatever they want and not be judged for it, and not judge themselves for it. And that's why they do these crazy rituals and obliterate themselves and, commit evil and all this stuff. And they're usually traumatized. And, if we want to talk about like the worst elites, like the satanic elites, that's what's going on. But in this novel, we have someone that doesn't just do it. We have a guy that doesn't just do this immoral act and keep going. He has not an intellectual reaction. He has a physiological reaction, which I think is wonderful by Dostoevsky. He's isolating, he's paranoid, he's having fevers, he's in a delirium, like there's a million things happening to him, and he's starting to go mad, and like his body can't contain itself. This is Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, you know what I mean? Like, And the problem is that if you reach a dehumanized point, and this is something we've somewhat discussed, then even love is a calculation. Because let's say I do something, let's say I go and I baseball bat some dude in the back of the head, and he's fine. He's not fine, but he gets knocked out, but he lives on the street, right? Or like I'm a really evil person, or I'm murdering people or something like that. Well, if I'm guilty in my soul, then every good thing I do is seemingly trying to repair that, trying to make up for that. And like I'm doing this like moral calculus within my soul. And Dostoevsky starts to show that too. And so there's a lot of stuff. There's like love stuff in this, and devotion and commitment. But one thing to kind of keep on the theme that we've been talking about is orientation. That this doesn't get resolved within the novel. Nothing gets resolved until there is a reorientation, a renewal of sight, and actually sharing the suffering instead of just existing in pure isolation. And so the Crime and Punishment has a lot of biblical aspects to it, has a lot of beautiful redemption arcs that like works on a lot of tropes and ideas and archetypal energies. And that's why so many people love this novel. That's why so many people come out for this one. And so on a literary level, this is one of Dostoevsky's stronger novels. That's why so many people read it. It's up there with the Brothers K and Demons, in my opinion. I feel like the redemption aspects are really strong also. I would say that there's a decent amount of emotional stuff in here. Emotional stuff, there's intellectual stuff, and there's obviously spiritual stuff, which is what I've been talking about. So I'm going to put this up at a 95. So next up, we have the Brothers Karamazov, which I feel like is one of the only contenders, as I am talking through it, that could really get up there. There's going to be more in the high 90s, but this is obviously one of them. Spoiler alert. So, man, this is Dostoevsky at his peak. So when you look at the Brothers Karamazov and you look back at a lot of the other novels we talked about, it's all building toward this moment. And it's interesting because he wrote this in his late 50s, and it's actually somewhat, unique in this. It's not necessarily unique, but it's such a cap on his life, because a lot of authors, right, they like have their peak, right? Like Cormac McCarthy writes Blood Meridian or such, and then he writes some books like All the Pretty Horses or The Road that are really good, but just not as good, maybe, just depending on who you are. And a lot of authors are like that, right? Like my boy Murakami back here. Like Murakami, I don't think has surpassed some of his novels from the 90s and early 2000s, but he's still releasing really good stuff. But Dostoevsky, because of his tragic, death at 59 years old or whenever he died, basically, got this out, and then he was done. And so we get this high point, which is good for analysis, because then we can it's like a clean look back, and we can see the progression. Like we get to see the underground man coming out through obviously some of the hedonistic sides, but then also some of the intellectual sides. We get to see the rebirth stuff happening in House of the Dead and Dostoevsky's experiences in the Siberian work camp. We get to see some of the elements of the double and doubling going on from his earlier novel, The Double. And Dostoevsky does this a lot, like The Landlady, then Crime and Punishment. Like you get, he did a really good job at basically just like continuing to grow and continuing to not do the same thing, but hit the same things, but then just bring in basically the same powers, which is what a lot of authors do. But you would be surprised sometimes by how some authors unsuccessfully try to deviate from the plan, from what the linear road that they're going on does. And so let's talk about it. Brothers Karamazov is about 3 plus 1 or half of a brother and their father. So their father is this sensualist, as my The Michael Katz translation calls it. I don't know if the P&V translation calls it that. He is this hedonistic, sensual man that loves the extreme, ecstatic states of life. Women, drink, making some money, just having a riled up time. And he has these sons that he doesn't even care about that are raised. Dmitri, Ivan, Alexei, and also a bastard son. And through each one of these, we basically get the final product of the archetypes that I keep want to say McCarthy, Dostoevsky was working through the entire time. And if you guys don't know this, I actually filmed this entire video and the audio was screwed up. And so this is my second time filming it, which is good and bad. But when I filmed it for the first time, my daughter was really sick. She just had like a 103 fever for a couple days, like, sick. She's young. And we weren't sleeping very much because she was up all night and having to take care of her. So I was like sleeping like 5 hours a night. So when I filmed it, like I was getting all the same points across, and I do all this without a script. This is all just off the top, but my pronunciation was off. And I was listening back to some of it, like, okay, how did I do? And like, I was saying, I said Dostoevsky nozzles instead of novels. So I'm excited that I'm functioning a little bit better today. And thank God for you, because you're like, who the hell am I listening to? Maybe you're thinking that already. But so there are three brothers. And so each one of them basically will talk about the transformative element. So stylistically, let's start there. This is a masterpiece. This is a masterpiece of philosophical fiction. Dostoevsky, I've known people that have had major spiritual revolutions because of this novel. I've known people that have become Orthodox Christians because of this novel. I've known people that are atheists that have rethought and gotten into Christianity and not converted, but started to think about it and contemplate some of the deeper emotional aspects of their lives. So philosophically, this is a really strong novel, and the structuring of it is really good, and the way that it's implemented is really good, and that's something that Dostoevsky learned. So as I've talked about, Dostoevsky relies sometimes on histrionics, and they're in this novel too, that like there's a clown dude that's just like saying random shit and going crazy, the holy fool. He loves the holy fool. He loves the histrionic woman that causes chaos. He loves the silent woman, like and drinking people and like abuses. Like he has all these like wild people that like sometimes can seem unbelievable. But in the Brothers Karamazov, I swear to God, like that happens. But it, like usually, first of all, you're there for it. Usually he builds the tension so much. Like at the start of this novel, there's like a meeting between the dad and the priest and a couple of the brothers, and the dad who like hates Christianity, and like the tension is so fucking high, and like that you're just like, oh my God, like this is like, we're here, it's like pay-per-view, like I'd pay money for this, like it's awesome. And so even though like there's some histrionics in there and it's kind of odd and somewhat manufactured, like I don't notice. Like I've read this like 4 times, and the last time I read it I was laughing because I was like, I don't care, like let's get it, I love it, like this is like WWE in here. But I believe it. I'm down for I'll kayfabe. It's the work shoot's working on me, like I'll mark out, as they say. People that don't know anything about wrestling were just like, what the hell did Ian say? Well, you guys already know that when you're the greatest booktuber in the world, they don't call you the greatest booktuber in the world. They call you right conscious. And all of those other jobbers that all of you guys put over, with my newfound spark, now that the sun is shining in the Pacific Northwest, I'm going to take every single one of them out. There's going to be so much content in your feed that you're not going to know what to do with it. And it's only going to get better. There it is. There's the promo. So the payoff is there. The style is there. Like very, very high level going on in the Brothers Karamazov. And so let's talk about the three brothers and their transformation. So the first one is Dmitri, and he's just like the father. He is passionate, impulsive, and like just heading into the world like that. And that can reflect through many of us, right? That we've created a culture, and it's not just like, you don't just have to be like addicted to pornography or something like that to be feeling this, but just like an addiction to like the terrible foods that we have or social media. Like we've become consumers, we've become addicted to some of these things. And so Dmitri is that brother, and like we get some good stuff in here, and we get some good revelations on the sensualist part of our souls. I feel like that I got a part of this in my soul. Like I've got a part of this, like, as you can maybe see, the grandiosity, the impulsiveness, like this sensual nature. And like, it's honestly one of the, look, I'm a little uncomfortable about it because it's something that, Dostoevsky argues that you're born with at some level. But it was really hard to like get a handle of, you guys. Like, and it took a deep spiritual revolution, you guys. It took me like having to basically live out in the desert and be doing yoga and meditation and reading and learning Sanskrit. And like, I wasn't in a cult either. That's what it sounds like, right? No, I was out there basically alone. It took years of that to really like lift a lot of that out of my soul. Like it took a lot, and it still didn't get all the way out. And and it's taken me a long time, and then having that, and like having a family and like basing into that just to get that out of my soul. And so you get a beautiful display of that. And I think that many modern men do with this. Like, I know so many guys, like, it makes me want to cry, you guys, like, that are still stuck in this mentality, that are still, you know, just totally living off of their passions and their impulsivity and ruining their families' lives. Like, if they're in they can refuse to have any depth in their life, or if they've gotten married, are cheaters, or like just doing weird stuff and just like aren't giving it. And like, I could literally track it to their father. Their father was the exact same way. And so our next brother is Ivan, and he's the middle son. He is the rationalist. He is the atheist. And he's so good because it's so easy for us to become detached in the world that we have like legitimate atheists now, you guys, that are just like so flattened, so numb, so disconnected that like they don't even grapple with it. Like, that's just the model they frame reality through. And it's just like insane to me. Like, as I've said before, like, if you're one of those types of atheists, it's like you're like in RuneScape, like you're in like Tutorial Island, like you're playing like the tutorial of your favorite video game still. And like, we're out here playing the game. And that is the greatest temptation of the world, to throw out spirituality in the spiritual world and just relish in all this intelligence and rationality that's around us. And he does a good job, because he talks about like, how can we have like, you know, a God that's good and have suffering in the world? How can we be spiritual in a world where, you know, all this insanity is going on? And like, that's the argument that, you know, made me not be a Christian anymore when I was like in 8th grade, that I discovered in Dostoevsky's works and others. And, you know, and then I, you know, eventually resolved some of that in a totally different way than what Dostoevsky presents. But that's, you know, almost the core of theology and spirituality, is trying to answer that question. And why Ivan is such a good brother is that he's not like a detached atheist, because he actually cares. He actually wants good things for people. He thinks that we can live in a more moral world if we get rid of Christianity or religion, which it's obviously like if you look at the history, like, yeah, like that seems like a good idea, until you peel back the layers, which is what Dostoevsky does. And so the problem is that the novel shows that the inherent act of disbelief, which you can't remain neutral, leads you eventually to cruelty. It leads to cynicism. It leads to despair. Going back to Pierre, that we have this yearning soul within us, and that if you can't fill that, or aren't trying to fill that, and don't think that there's an avenue to fill that, if your worldview has been poisoned, and you don't need to, you know, go get baptized in the river today. But Ivan's main section in the novel, that's like, I would say, one of the most famous scenes in literature outside of John Galt's speech. Just joking. So in that section, Ivan imagines a world where Christ returns, and the churches arrest him because they see him as a threat to their power, which is exactly what would happen, right? Because if you detach, if you become impersonal, this is a big theme in Russian culture and post-revolution also. Can you really love? Can love really happen through an institution? Can you have salvation through a church when it's asking you to basically have to be a certain person to appear like you deserve salvation? And what the Inquisitor basically says, and like, you know, I'm not really a spoiler because I'm not going to tell you what happens in the novel and the breakdown that happens after this and what that leads to and all the other insanity in the novel, is that people don't actually want freedom. And that's one of the main themes here. People don't want to be spiritually free. We want to appear as the good Christian. We want some money, you know, from the government. We want the roads to be good, but we actually don't want to be free. Tolstoy realized this. I think that most people eventually realize that. That's why we still have government. That's why we still haven't escaped this. Like, eventually, if we raise the baseline to a level, we can live in a literal anarchist or communist or whatever society, whatever it is, because it would easily work. But just as we look at kings and queens and other systems of government as silly, people 1,000 years from now, if we accomplish the goal, are going to be like, dude, how did they not figure it out? It was just right there. They dumped $150,000 a year, across a educational lifetime into these K through 12 students, and they still can't figure this out. They have global distribution systems of information, and they still suck at this. We would rather be sleepers. We would rather not rock the boat and actually become free as individuals. And we see this all the time, that it's hard to do it. It would be hard societally, even if we did all wake up to actually break free from the institutions and the constraints and actually exist. And this is so good, you guys. This is the core of Dostoevsky's philosophy, because if you are worldview poisoned, if you believe that people can't handle their own freedom, then what do you need to do? Well, the people that can need to control them. And they're not going to like that, so you need to lie to them. And that's what we have right now. But that's the same thing when people view themselves spiritually. That's the internal, external thing that I was talking talking about earlier. He would rather control everything through his intellect and being a logic bro than actually going out there. And so this section is great because it gets into deeper metaphors and asks you the question. It doesn't even preach to you. This is the question of our time, you guys, because like I said, right now, I have to side with the side of control, because if we open things up, it would be pandemonium and chaos. Literally the lower version of anarchy. Anarchy isn't freedom from laws, it's freedom from masters. But we need laws because we're all too dumb, we don't have the intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical baseline yet to be able to handle it. And what's great about this is that Dostoevsky shows that this mindset creates a chimera, creates a monster within your soul. Whatever mindset that you're putting out into the world and that you're playing through also has a shadow self within your own soul. And if it's a crappy one, then you have to neglect it. This is why there's all these sad boys. This is why so many atheists are these little sad boys that are terrible husbands, terrible people, literally are addicts and weird and have these malignant behaviors. And I get it. I'm not trying to generalize. I get this is my anecdotal experience, because I get there's other men of Christ that are abusers and stuff. But by and large, the people I know that I can judge, and I've known hundreds of people personally to be able to come up with this information, and everyone I know could tell me the same thing, that the hardcore nihilists, the people that don't believe in God, a lot of the time, and I would say the people that believe naively in God and are just doing Christianity as a club or a spectacle, they're part of this group too. They aren't as good as the people that are, oh my God, crazy, consciously trying to connect to life and managing and doing this. Oh my God, revelation, because their internal world is much more beautiful and actually cultivated by just putting a no on the most important aspect of life, which is meaning. Just saying, no, there's none. Nope. I'm just going to help people, help everyone. I'm an atheist. That means I want to help people more. I'm not constrained. It's dude, okay. And that's fine. But you got to kayfabe and feel what it feels like to add some meaning, to believe in something. And then, like I said, good things happen. So I could go on and on about Ivan, but there's also another brother, Alyosha, who's going through life spiritually. He's gone into the church and is studying, and Dostoevsky is trying to show us that, or I should say, what it looks like to be grounded, what it looks like to be orientated. And that if you are going to seek freedom, then you need to have a deeper level of responsibility, that you have to manage it yourself, for your own self and for the people around you, for your society, for your community. There's a lot of more metaphysics. I need to do a 5-hour video on this novel. You can, plenty of people have. I wouldn't be the first person to do it, but I'll cut myself short here. I'm going to put this at a 97 out of 100, everyone. Like I said, struggles with almost nothing, but 97, let's go. If not higher, when I talk about it though, ooh, makes me want to go 99. Ooh, I don't know, everyone. 98. We're going to settle with 98.5 for the Brothers Karamazov. Thus ends our journey into Dostoevsky. Holy crap, we're going to be here for 40 hours if I keep this up. So we're going to keep the journey going. So speaking of Ivan's, our next novel is Ivan Turgenev. And man, what was awesome about him is that I didn't get into his works until later. I knew of him, but it wasn't until I was at university, when I was in my mid-20s finishing up my degree after years of isolation, that I had a buddy, one of these sad boy atheists, that was like, oh, you got to read him. Oh, you like Dostoevsky? And so then I just got into this world. So we are first talking about fathers and sons. So I think that Turgenev is an awesome author, but I think he somewhat struggles with a couple things. I hate struggle, right? He's really good, but compared to Dostoevsky and his metaphysics and the injection of philosophy and the scope and scale of what Tolstoy can usually accomplish, or just the quick hitters. Despite all that though, this novel is the perfect medium, and that's why I feel like it is a classic. That's why I'll just say the number out really fast. I'm going to give it a 93, I would say. So this novel features two young men who are nihilists, who've gone to university and have come back and they're just nihilists. They are the logic bros. They are exactly what we've been talking about. And one of the boys' fathers is a little bit unsure about it all, but he's supportive and he likes him. But eventually, and this is where it's really effective, and I think that it's not even simplistic. It's just got this one-sided focus that these young men start moving into love and realizing that women don't want to be with a nihilist. Women, unless they are severely broken, don't want to be someone or anybody. I mean, I don't want to be with a chick that feels like there's no meaning in the world. I guess some dudes that just want some person that isn't going to challenge them and is just Like I knew a chick like this. I've known a couple, but I knew one that I knew pretty personally, and she just basically would fall in with these guys that just wanted to use her, that would find meaning through her. Because most men actually prefer, if they're a nihilist, to find someone with the light. This is the toxic boy cycle. That there is this atheist, ironistic, or there's this guy that is a deconstructor. They're usually very funny. They have they can make anything flat. They can make anything funny. They have generally on the outside a good personality because they see through the bullshit of the world, right? They've seen through all these lies and traps, and they can help you break free. They can help things make lively again. But then once you go a couple levels deeper, you're like, wait, these people are dark. They're mean. Like they have things beneath the surface, and they prey on these women that have light inside them because they're trying to eat it. This is the narcissist and empath kind of relationship, and this is why so many of these relationships happen and obviously don't work out. And so that's what happens in this novel. I can't speak on it too broadly, but basically it's about these men who are confronted with love and how they exactly deal with that through their nihilism. And, it's obviously triumphant and tragic at the same time. I'm not going to spoil everything, but it's a direct analysis like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and even some other authors will talk about. Maybe do it behind the scenes or like do it in a sprawl, but this is a novel you can sit down. It's not that hard either. It's a pretty clear novel. This is something that you can just kind of sit down with and move through and be done. And that's why I'm throwing it at a 93, because it's a really good message. It maybe even should be higher. Like it is the message that love is important. And if you want to be single the rest of your life and not have a family, okay. Love is still important though. Love of nature, love of others, love of your family, love of your friends, love of your pets, like that, like love everybody. So next up we have the novella First Love. And this one doesn't have, I would say, the grandiosity of some of the other novels we are talking about. But I remember reading this and I remember this having an impact on me because Turgenev is he's a clear writer. And so this is a novella that isn't very long, and it's about a boy who falls in love with an older woman. And she's not that much older. I think he's 16 or 17 and she's 21, 22. And they have this passion, but there's other suitors around her and he gets jealous. And eventually they have this somewhat rocky and tumultuous relationship that's also very opening. And I won't spoil what happens, but there's a coming of age though. There's this emotional coming of age and this is a Russian classic for this type of stuff. And what it does is obviously show you how desire can get you into a bad situation, how it can start to blind you and to all these red flags that you just are passing by saying, yeah, I'm going this way. And this is important because in Russian society, with this idealism that was cropping up, that's what happens when you're an idealist and you meet someone that's once again, it seems like this is a theme through the work, a leech. And in this sense, it's a woman, which, I've been in one of these relationships, guys. Like I was out of the game, you guys. I didn't write for an entire year. I didn't do anything for an entire year, literally, when I was like in my 20s, because I got taken out in one of these leeching relationships. After having done everything, after having raised the baseline, this stuff happens all the time. And usually it happens when you are open, when you are trying to do things. And so I would say this is a cautionary tale. It's a little bit short, so I'm going to throw it in at a 78, even though I just said a lot of nice things. It's written well, but the impact transformatively isn't too great. I think if it's a young man, if you're giving this to someone at the start of their journey, this could be easily in the 90s, but I think for just the average reader, it's just a thing to remember and keep in mind. So the other Turgenev novel that I've read is Home of the Gentry, and I'm not going to do a big talk on it because I'm going to just throw it down in the 70s again. I think that it just plays on a lot of things I've been talking about, so boom. And I should say not as well. This was earlier in his career, and very forgettable novel for me, just kind of I could rant to you guys about it, but we don't need to. So next up we have Dead Souls, and let me get our boy out of here, by Nikolai Gogol, if I'm saying that correctly. I don't think it's Gogol, I think it's Gogol. But this is one of the first novels out there that really, I feel like, striked out at the bureaucracy of the modern world and what we could call systems thinking. And so this novel is about this kind of opportunist entrepreneur who decides to go into a town with a bunch of serfs, and he goes to all these landowners and buys all the souls, buys all of these names from dead serfs who are still alive on the census records, so that he can like take out loans and like have prestige in society, so that he can have like, oh look, I have 5,000 serfs or whatever it is, and become this opportunist. And so first of all, it's just really funny, like emotional. It's just like, what? Like the concept is really striking, especially for the time, and basically talks about our society, how up now and back then we just view people as flat, as nothing, as just these transactions. This talks about the fiat economy, how basically money and labor and all that is disconnected now and has been for a long time. It talks about how we can't track bureaucracy, that none of this is even possible, right? That when things get so big, and that's just Russia, but even today you hear about corruption and all the money and all the random things that are going on. We can't follow any of it. It's an absolute disaster. And so this novel really strikes on that and eventually turns into something more. So it starts off with like kind of this initial thing and some trouble with this initial scheme, and then we basically get into this entire backstory and in the entire life of the guy that decides to do this, which is also compelling. And so this is an unfinished novel, and apparently there was supposed to be an arc. So the novel goes like this: we get this, and then there's a downfall, like the scheme doesn't work, and then we get this backstory, and then there was supposed to be a redemption with all of this, and through the idea of the dead souls, which is absolutely spectacular. And so because it's unfinished though, I'm gonna put this down at like an 84. Like this is something that I always will remember. This is like a really good novel, but because it being unfinished, we are going to have to put it a little bit lower, unfortunately, but very innovative, especially during the time period, and influential. So next we have, I think we're recording, sorry, A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Mayer-Luntov, if I'm saying his name correctly. And funny enough, this was on the Right Conscious Book Club schedule for 2026, and I just had to make some decisions. Like last year, I think in 2025, this year we're doing 28 novels. Last year we did like 60 or 70 novels. I can't remember the number, but it made us the most active book club in the world. And like your boy was reading, and a lot of those included these insane Dostoevsky novels that were really long, and Thomas Pynchon, and like it was a lot, you guys. Like I was reading, like I won't say I was reading too much, but I was like reading a lot, and like people I think were turned off by the idea, because when you think of a book club, you want to keep up with the book club and like read all the books. And so that's why a lot of book clubs just do like 6 books or 12 books a year, and doing 28 is almost enough, because I tell everyone you don't have to read all of them. Just if you can, that's great, but just read one a month. Like it's all good, doesn't matter. You don't have to read 4 or 3 or whatever it is. And people just can't like get that sometimes. And so anyway, this was about to be on, but it got cut for, I think, Yukio Mishima's Temple of the Golden Pavilion was what I was like, no, we're Mishima. But so once again, we're hopping on a similar theme, and that's why some of these books are going to start moving faster, because I've already talked about all this kind of before. So this features a protagonist named Grigori, and the framing of this is really interesting. This was a mid-19th century novel, if I remember correctly. And there's like shifts within the narrative where like we move into like diary format, and like eventually moving away from the narrative. There's like a lot of weird shifts, and like it's somewhat akin to the style of 19th century literature. So it's cool in that sense. But this novel is following Grigori, who is your typical spiritual nihilist who believes in himself and is like out in the world doing a bunch of stuff, but he can never commit to anything. He can never commit to a job, to a lifestyle, to a woman. And it shows this idea of the charmer, because, I can reflect on myself here, that when I would date women, and back when I was like in high school and a little bit in like when I was like first year of college, like I wasn't mean about it. Like when I would like leave them or like, mess around, like I was just honestly just carefree and nonchalant. Like it was just kind of like whatever. Like I wanted a girlfriend because I was curious, and like I wanted to be the guy that had the girlfriend. Like I wanted to have someone that was mine, that like I could possess. And I remember when I was in Utah, I would, like try to date these Mormon girls and be like, yo, Joseph Smith, you got with 14-year-olds. Like there's no elephants in South America. And then blow their mind and make them become sinners. And then be like, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm going to worry about something else. I'm going to focus on meditation for a month. And what was so funny is I just rocked the world and left just because I wanted to see if I could do it. And what's so funny is that some of them like hit me up for years after, like they'd be married with kids and and like, dude, you were right. It's all a lie. Save me. I was like, dude, I can't. But this is a portrayal of the modern Renaissance man who can do everything, that can be everyone, that you're Huberman optimized. You got everything correct. Everything is perfect. You got your money right. You got everything clean, but you're building nothing. And that's what most people are, that you don't need to be this rampant nihilism deconstructing anything, but the optimization bros, the optimization push in our society is just a way to disconnect actually from the soul. And this novel is an example of that. This novel is an example of this old ideal that has moved into our society now, that is just based on disconnection. And that's why it is absolutely wonderful and why it's getting a very good rating from me. So next we have another Ivan. They're just going to keep coming. And Ivan Goncharov and his novel Oblomov. And this one is really interesting. This one is, I think, talking about a certain theme that we haven't necessarily been talking about. This is about a landowner that isn't lazy, but he's basically fallen into contentment in his life, that he basically has everything taken care of, that he has his serf, he has his life, and he could just sit around and basically do nothing. He does have to manage his estate, but he has people who can help him do that and all that type of stuff. And so this is a really big parallel to our modern lifestyle, because the standard of living has been raised so much in our lives, or at least some people's lives can be so easy, that we can easily fall into this type of discontentment, because Oblomov, is rooted in comfort. And once again, like the nihilist leeching on the empath, there are men like this also, that want that feel awakened by the muse, feel awakened by women, and being able to talk and do these things wakes them up, but they never go over the edge. They never really figure it out. They never push themselves to actually change an individual way, and instead just get with someone who won't push them. And that's what this novel is about. What happens when you don't push yourself? Like, there is no grand narrative in this except that. And just waking up, working an easy creative class job, or you just like are working remotely or doing something it's not that stressful, then either not having a relationship and just playing video games and doing a little bit of optimization, or just having like a very chill relationship with someone that isn't really making you grow. What kind of life is that? And that's what this novel is asking. And like I said, it's really a beautiful parallel, and one of the more transformative novels I think a modern person can read, because it shows you what happens when you don't individuate but have the power to. There are people in the world still to this day that are born in a working class environment that's hard, and because of abuse and other things, even though they had opportunities, statistically they just didn't take it. Like, it's just somewhat hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, it is, like, honestly. And so many people don't do that, and it's not their fault. But there are many others now, and there's more and more of these people who have the opportunity to pull themselves up, like spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, and refuse to. And what does your life do if you do that? What happens? And I feel like there's a negative inertia that happens, that if you don't tap into your potential, then that's going to come back and eat you alive. And I mean, that's a cautionary tale all throughout literature. So the novel's written very well. I think it's stylistically maybe not the greatest novel of all time. It's once again one of these 19th century novels that has some elements that are lacking, but I would say the messaging is going to put it up at an 86 for me. Next, we have the novella The Duel by Chekhov. And I'm just going to speak broadly about Chekhov here, because he's obviously much more famous for short stories, and I can't sit and cover every single one of them and whatnot. So we'll just speak about this novella and Mother Russia, right? So this is just, like I said, a very beautiful novel of a mother's love transcending into support, but then for the working class in general, to the nth degree, and what the state does to mother's love. And these are deeper messages, and like, I get it, like, people are like, socialism, terrible experiment and all this stuff, but it comes from a nice place. It comes, like, even if you believe that, if you're a human, you would admit that we have treated people terribly, and that many people are still left out and oppressed, and that, like, it's very obvious that people will have socialist sentiments. And especially back then, when workers were being treated really bad, and we hadn't really opened up like the real capitalistic engine yet to raise the quality of living, which is now somewhat failing us, now that the quality of living is becoming high, or that prices are becoming higher and higher, and it's harder and harder to be able to live anymore. And so I'm going to throw this at like an 84. It's a good novel, but it it just has a message, which is fine, but it doesn't move into deeper levels of, I would say, ambition or even transformation. So next we have We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, if I'm saying that correctly. I just actually talked about this novel in another video that I am trying to remember. I think the Social Media is a Cult video. Go check that one out. That one's really fun. But this is a dystopian classic. I like this novel better than Brave New World. I don't know. The thing about Aldous Huxley is this, that I learned that Aldous Huxley was involved with like the Esalen Institute, and his brother Julian Huxley was involved with all this crazy conspiracies and all this stuff before I ever read Brave New World. I figured all that stuff out when I was like 19. And so then I was trying to date some girl named Selena, and she was like into Aldous Huxley and like read all of his novels. So then I started to read them all, and like, but I always had this like hint in my mind, and like, funny enough, nothing that never got off the ground. She was like, she was definitely an op, bro. And so this novel is like most classic dystopian novels. What are they talking about? Huxley, George Orwell, Ayn Rand. That we're living in a perfect world where everything's controlled, where you can only have sex or go have fun when you are permitted to do it. And one of these characters, and everyone's named a number, he meets a chick that, of course, it's here's Eve, here we go, everyone. He meets a woman that decides to tempt him, and really just tempts him through her personality. And this basically follows the typical narrative too of not to spoil anything, of a 1984 or this type of stuff. It's just kind of got this hardcore totalitarian effort, an idea about the entire thing that's very constricting, which is fine. I think that's more effective than somebody getting out like at the end of, what is it, Ayn Rand's little novella Anthem, where like they escape and they're like, I figured out the word, it's ego, and like out in the woods, like it's like the Absol Kendrick Lamar Illuminate video. Go watch that one. If you're into rap, I'm sure everyone knows that song. It was in Grand Theft Auto 5, Radio Los Santos or whatever it was. You guys got the Russian classics video before GTA 6 came out. Let's go. So I mean, this stuff we all generally know, I think, but just reading about it is really fun, and just being able to track the influence. That's what's somewhat sad about this, that I can pick up the Brothers Karamazov and still get a lot. But with something like this, the dystopic, totalitarian AI, whatever, tracking, whether you're watching Psycho-Pass, the anime, Shogo Makishima, or whatever, that like I had a friend back in the day. That's how I got into that show. Like we became friends, and I would be like quoting books. He'd be like, dude, you're like this dude. Like, you're insane. Like, what? Whoa. If you've never seen it, Psycho-Pass is an awesome anime with a guy that quotes like Philip K. Dick and like even like Russian novelist named Shogo Makishima, and he's the main villain, and he like doesn't give a fuck, bro. He's a nihilist. Really cool series. But because of that, stuff like this almost feels antiquated. It doesn't feel like we've built on the Brothers Karamazov as much. We have a little bit with like Cormac McCarthy and Faulkner and others, but with I feel like this is the model. And so it's a fun read. It's a good read. It's not that long. The influence is really, really high, but I'm going to put it at like an 83 though, because it's like everything we already know. Like I could sit and rant for 15 minutes, but like we already know like how we're being systematized. I've already talked about it. So next we have one that blew my mind a couple years ago that I had no idea, that wasn't on my radar. So something that I try to do is I'm like trying to, obviously, like earlier I was talking about the Bible. This is my job, you guys. Like I'm a reader. Like I talk to people over in the Substack community all the time, trying to get book recommendations. I read over 100 novels a year because like this is what I do. And so I like, I try to fill in the weaknesses, especially though, because like there are these major things. Like I don't know too much about Costa Rican literature. I don't know too much about South African literature, even though Tolkien is from South Africa. But like, I don't know too much about some of these random regions or certain decades. But the goal as a reader, is to fill those things in with whatever you want to do. And so a couple of years ago, I felt the call when I was in university to do Russian literature because I was getting shamed, bro. I was hanging out with these logic bros, these nihilists, and I go, oh. But I found this one on my own just through research. So this is by Ilyich and Yevgeny Petrov. And this is our first Soviet novel of the day. So as you guys can somewhat tell, we're moving forward in time. So if we've missed something, I'm sorry. I tried to make the list. I tried to think of everything because I had to downsize to become a full-time content creator and writer for the cause of the literary renaissance. I had to move from, normal sized apartment or, dwelling to a 900 square foot apartment. And so having my over 1,500 books out is no longer a possibility unless I just want the entire house to be books. Because, we have a nursery and then we have our room and then we have this room. So, and a small common room. So this novel is about greed, basically. It's a satire novel. It's a little bit lighter. I mean, we've honestly been talking about all those old Russian novels are just chicks getting screwed over and suicide and contemplations of God, way too extra. And as we get into, what's so crazy is as we get into the Soviet Union, things get even more brutal. Everyone just has to start using satire, and it's becoming more common in literature, but just because you somewhat have to, because it's just everything's locked down and that. So this is about a man who's talking to his mother, and she basically says that there are these family jewels that are worth a ton, and they were sewn into these chairs. They're hidden in these chairs that were confiscated and basically sent around the country. And if you find them, then you'll be rich. And so it's this kind of hunt around Russian society of that confronts all these different things. There's just, one could call it a carnival. It's almost like The Master and the Margarita. This is the start of a Russian the Russian doll thing that somehow pulls itself out in literature, which was already a thing in some of the earlier novels, but it starts to just become more. I don't think that Russian literature is necessarily psychedelic. It never strikes me, and even some of the novels we're going to talk about, as very psychedelic. Even something that's trying to be surreal, Come and See, the movie, the World War II movie. It feels more like dark surrealism more so than magical realism or psychedelic. I think things were just so rough over there and so hard and obviously so locked down that they never had that movement and never really allowed themselves that space, because even other modernists writing around this time that didn't know about the Beatles yet, because it's 4 decades early, still had some sparks in it. But these novels, you get the characters right, you get the anyway. So this novel is basically about greed and about how when it's weaponized, it is seen as something good. It's seen as a marker of success, because these guys, to try to find these chairs, are just going and scamming and doing whatever they can to find them. But what you start to realize is this, you guys, that to be vital in this world, to get shit done in this world, a lot of the time, especially in a world where morality and a lot of these things on the honor code are slipped away, is you just got to be an asshole. Have you ever worked at a corporation and seen these crazy guys that don't see their family or don't have a family or just ruining the environment, doing whatever they can, and it's oh my God, we reward that and we think that's vitalism. We think that David Goggins, who has had multiple marriages and a crazy past, just because he goes hard and is that's inspirational, and it is. And I love David Goggins. I listen to him all of the time, but we've switched our priorities. That's not success. That's not bodily success. That's not health success. Longevity and taking care of your bodies. And what I should say, okay, David Goggins has been married. That's just life happens. The dude's body's destroyed. He can't run. He's had he went too hard. And so this novel has some dark twists and turns and, makes you contemplate eventually some of these characters. Okay, well, what does this mean though? What is it worth it? Is this journey worth it? What happens? Can you live a life without this type of stuff? So I'm going to throw this at an 86. I would also recommend The Little Golden Calf by these guys, which I would also rank pretty highly. And so moving on, Mikhail Bulgakov and his two novels and novella, I should say, Heart of the Dog and The Master and the Margarita. And we are reading The Master and Margarita in June in the Right Conscious Book Club, and I want to see each and every one of you guys there. If you guys want to support me and the Literary Renaissance, come out to the book club. It's going to be fun. We're going to have all types of people there. That's going to be a crazy day. I can't remember what else we are doing, but that day we're also doing our final Gravity's Rainbow Call for an hour and a half, and then Suttree by Cormac McCarthy, which is one of the greatest novels of all time, the greatest Southern novel of all time, in my opinion. So we're going to do basically three classics, three of the greatest novels, for sure, all in my top 50 and maybe even in my top 25. Master and the Margarita, somewhere in that top 30, top 35 for me. And so this is the ultimate satirical takedown. We'll talk about The Master and Margarita first, of Russia. So the novel basically features the devil coming back to Russia and just exposing Russian Soviet. I keep saying sorry, right? I have to switch to Soviet. We're in Soviet land now. Soviet society as a whole. And it's not just like a bunch of pranks, but it basically plays on the entire Jesus story. It plays on this idea of a society of non-believers and inverts all of it. And the novel is somewhat actually hard to talk about. Out of all the novels we are going to discuss today, this one is pretty epic and expansive and somewhat random without me spoiling too much, which I'm not going to do. And so I'm going to try to do my best job. So one of the interwoven things in this novel is this figure of Pontius Pilate. And there's a whole section dedicated to Pontius Pilate talking to Jesus, right? And him and Jesus are discussing, having their famous discussion, but he realizes, and we're getting interiority and stuff, that Jesus isn't dangerous. And he realizes that he doesn't care that if he's the son of God or not. He's not afraid of God, but what he's afraid of is looking weak, that he basically has to kill Jesus because it's the safer thing to do, and he has to hold on to the power. And so what this kind of lends to, and something that we kind of see throughout the novel, which is kind of the main thread of spiritual thought, is that Pilate, throughout the rest of his life, executes Jesus, but experiences inner torment, experiences spiritual dread. And all of this is this metaphor to how can you function as an artist under authority when everything that you are doing could, first of all, get you killed, get your family killed. That is, it's going to be censored. You could be humiliated, because this novel also focuses on a man, or I should say a poet, who wrote a novel about Pilate, and basically is kicked out of the literary intelligentsia of the Soviet Union. He is eventually institutionalized because no one wanted to hear his message. No one wanted to hear his truth. And so there's like some layering and metafictional parallelism going on here. And the novel is called The Master and the Margarita because there is our female protagonist in this named the Margarita, and she wants to save the master. She wants to save his work. She wants to liberate it and give it out to the world because she feels like it's important. But this is all constrained in Soviet Russia. It's all constrained within these fantastical elements. But that gives it weight, because within the Soviet Union, and this is so smart, you can't do anything. Like, are you going to overthrow the Soviet Union with your novel? No, right? You're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. But what the Margarita does is say, okay, these novels aren't going to be received. These artists, these people, truth is no longer available. And so she decides, and here we go, that she is going to become a force or strike a deal with the devil to make sure that the vulnerable, the weak, the whoever are no longer messed with. And so that's kind of the setup for the novel. And there's a lot of insane stuff in this. And I know I didn't pitch this very well. It's really hard to do. I've had to pitch this like 3 times for my book club. Like, I've made multiple videos about this and talked about it. It lacks some things though. And I think it's partially because I feel like by the time the Soviet Union comes around, and we're going to see some authors in a second. For instance, we're going to hear from Nabokov in a second, who was writing in America, but still in Russia, or he was writing in Europe, if I remember correctly. But the constraints of the Soviet Union almost made it impossible to write freely. You had to write about certain topics, or your works had to be published posthumously or smuggled out. And so I think that Soviet literature really starts to fall behind like American literature and European literature and even world literature at large, starting around this time. And this is one of the kind of the last good attempts. And we'll talk about some others that are good just because of the topics like World War II and other things. But The Master and the Margarita, I'm going to throw in at an 86. Next, we have the novella The Heart of the Dog, which is much shorter and a really good novel. I was talking about it recently on the channel also. And so this novel is about a scientist who decides to turn a dog into the human, and it works. And this dog starts harassing women and drinking and basically becoming this kind of embodiment of the malignant Bolshevik. And it blows up into this huge anti-totalitarian metaphor about Russian society because this dog starts infiltrating the society and causing problems. And it's this big overarching metaphor that you just can't replace people, that the Soviet Union had this idea that you could just kill people and the new generation will come in and they'll just believe all of the propaganda. And this novel shows that it's a structural problem, that just having the one great thing, like finish doing one great project in the Soviet Union or doing one thing won't change the culture and won't change how everything really functions. That freedom and love and like a lot of these truths that we've been talking about need to be present or it's just not going to be possible. So next up is Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. And this is a Russian Revolution and Russian Civil War novel that really shows the turbulent times that everyone who was a part of it went through, which was basically the entire country. What's really interesting about this work is that Pasternak is a poet. And so you get, more so than a lot of the other stuff that we've read so far, a bit of flowery prose, a bit of abstraction, a bit of metaphor, a bit of leaping, a bit of beauty, which I really think is important for Russian prose because I've read a lot of Russian poetry, but I don't read Russian. And I have friends, though, who do or are from Russia or somewhere in Eastern Europe or Ukraine. And they tell me when I talk about poetry that the Russian use of alliteration and language and rhythm is some of the best of the 20th century and late 19th century, that they were doing things that were just as good, if not better, in terms of sound and other things as some of the poets in the West, or I should say Europe and America, or even South America with Neruda and others. So this novel is trying to fit inside a love story, a ton of information on revolution and, Russian politics and ideology. And Pasternak tries to balance this because, okay, so he has this poetic voice, and our main character, Yuri, is a doctor that sees the world through the eyes of a poet because in the story, he's also a poet. So he's trying to push this idea that the Russian Revolution on both sides is basically reducing itself to slogans and slang and like this very basic ideology, this very divisionary ideology that's just trying to put you on one side or the other. And Yuri can't see the world like that. So there's a little bit of tension with that I think is really genius, that I think it kind of maybe can go over people's heads. I know it kind of went over my head, and I don't know if the translation does it any justice either, at least the one I read. And so what's interesting is that religion isn't that big of a part of the novel, but this renewed and almost sacramental and devotion to this mentality, to this lens, to this type of thinking and feeling continues to happen throughout the novel, even when injustice or like deeper problems are happening. I also like the intellectual challenge that's presented with that combines with all of this, and we're not even getting into like the love angle yet, which is like the real driver of the story, that everyone is having to change who they are. That once a revolution happens, if you are a doctor or you are a teacher, then you are no longer that. You have to become something else. So all categories have been debased. Friendship, family, religion, all of that is gone because those things can betray you or have been eliminated. And the main message, which I resonate with, is that when everything is eliminated, who you are, your orientation is all that matters, to go back to our very earliest theme of today's presentation. And so because of that, because of the language, because I would say of the tragic love story that's involved in this, and everything in this novel is somewhat tragic, I'm going to rate this up at an 87. I personally enjoyed this. There were some things that let me down, but overall, I feel like this is one of the better Russian Revolution novels I have ever read. And I feel like when I read it years ago, I probably read it 7 or 8 years ago, it was my lack of understanding and nuance that maybe held me back from a lot of the understanding of some of the ideology and politics and stuff that was going on that I've now learned a lot more about. So next up, we have One Day in the Life of Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And it's so funny that Mr. Stewart, my 8th grade teacher, hated this book. Like, I remember like looking it up online or like finding it in the library, and he said, no, go read House of the Dead if you want to read something. If you want to read about a labor camp. So this is one of the more influential Russian novels of all time because it actually broke through. It actually got published in the Soviet Union. And when that happened, it eventually started to show people and bring into the public conversation what was happening in these camps. So this is basically Solzhenitsyn writing about his life, about his experience in a work camp and the mentality. But it's all just across one day. And the story is just about trying to get food, about this, our character, Ivan, trying to get as much food as possible, whether he's trading something, doing extra work, gathering favors, being friends with someone who knows someone, and getting a little bit of stuff from them. It's just basically the plotting to make sure that he can get as much food as possible so that he can get out of there. Because, if you get sick or can't work or don't have enough food, you have a possibility to starve. And so food is basically the central resource because there's nothing else you can get. You don't get vacation leave. there's nothing really you can get. And so if you think you are going to get out and you know that you're, getting out on a certain date, then that is one of the main things that you should be striving for. But of course, you see the horrors of the camps. You see the terrible conditions, the general monotony, like this insane labor that they are all doing. And so I think my teacher, Mr. Stewart, didn't like this because it didn't have that much depth to it. This is written in a minimalist style, and if you compare it to like Dostoevsky's House of the Dead, it doesn't have that expansiveness. But, one could argue, and that's what I think people would say, is that this is what the mentality is. You don't have room to be contemplating the Old Testament like Dostoevsky or whatever in these places. And even if, and most people don't, like that's like this unrealistic expectation that we have. It's just about worrying about survival. And so this reads to me as more of like a survival guide, just like, this is how you survive in a Russian work camp. And obviously influential, pretty good read, like really interesting. Obviously, Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago and other novels. And so, or excuse me, that was a nonfiction work. And he's written other novels that I haven't actually had the opportunity to read yet. So let me know down below if I should, what your ratings are, just judging how I'm rating. I'm going to give this one an 83. And so next up we have Mikhail Shalakov's And Quiet Flows the Dawn, which is an absolute epic, which I feel like is the 20th century equivalent to Tolstoy's War and Peace. And this is the greatest piece of art ever created, in my opinion, but there's really no other contender on the Cossacks. Tolstoy wrote a novella titled The Cossacks, which we're not going to cover today. That's pretty good. And the Cossacks are featured in War and Peace, at least as like a secondary force that just is, always hanging around. But this novel is about basically their people and their history moving through pre-World War I, World War I, and then into the Russian Revolution, and then the Civil War. And so this novel isn't necessarily about the Russian Revolution or about necessarily characterization or stuff like that. It's about the Cossack way of life, about the martial spirit, about honor and reputation and military reputation and like village politics and what all that looks like. And what a civil war does, which is like kind of the big like boom moment in this novel, is the separation of a people. When we think of like Americans in the American Civil War going against each other, that was a group of people that were only together, some for not that long, but just, maybe 100, 200 years at most. And America was never even that cohesive. But the Cossacks, by the time we reach the early 1900s, had been around for 500 years. I mean, it's we really attribute the start of them to the 15th century. So for those that don't know, the Cossack people are basically the horse people of Russia. They are the frontiersmen. They are in and are still in, and there's still cultural Cossack groups in Ukraine and then east of Ukraine in that area of southern Russia that's north of the Black Sea, north of Georgia, and west of the Caspian Sea, among some other places. Obviously, horse people, nomads, have this kind of large area. And so historically, they were used as mercenaries for Russian military and for the Russian military and other people, and would get exchanges, whether monetarily or for citizenship or other things, for helping out the Russians. And one of the strong things about the novel is that before wars or any conflict gets started, we basically learn about the politics of the town. We go through this nice drama of village life and, betrayals. Because in tribes like this, like, if you have an affair with someone, it's like honor culture, like, like crazy stuff happens. Like here in America, if you sleep with someone's wife, like maybe they'll come and murder you, but there's 99.9% chance they won't, and you'll be fine if they figure out about it. Like it's just whatever. Maybe you'll get harassed or something. But if you're living in one of these traditional villages, even in the early 19th century, in 1910, it could be big trouble. And what's tragic about this is that almost immediately when the war starts and the side splits, that these people, the love, the history that they have, because of this machine, basically it all gets broken down. That in a civil war, just these titles, these things start slipping away, and it's absolutely tragic. And so I would also say, because this novel was written later than Tolstoy, it's more ambitious and a little bit more real in terms of its ability to talk about sex and violence, and is a little bit more modern in that sense too. So it's almost an upgrade across the board. I don't think it's as well executed. I don't think the philosophical stuff is as strong. I don't think the threads and the ambition are there just as much. I think that's maybe even a length issue, but I'm going to come and put this at a 93. I think this is an absolutely wonderful novel if you have not checked it out yet. So next up, we have Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, and I literally just talked about this in yesterday's video on the 10 novels that prove that war is a death ritual, and so I would go check that out. But just for those who don't know about this, this is a World War II novel that's an epic. It deals with Stalingrad, it deals with physics, it deals with it's really just a sprawling epic, like that's a real pushback against Russia or the Soviet Union, I should say. It's a real just like